Hello, history lovers, and welcome back to History Channel. Today I show you about how Roman soldiers survived brutal winters without fire. The winter problem, the cold, was not just a backdrop to Roman military life on the frontiers. It was a force that shaped every decision, every movement, and every night's rest. When winter descended on regions like Germania and Britannia, temperatures dropped to levels that made even the simplest tasks feel punishing. Soldiers accustomed to the warmer climate of the Mediterranean suddenly found themselves in landscapes where frost clung to leather gear, winds sliced through thin gaps in clothing, and the ground hardened into an unforgiving slab of ice. In these moments, the cold didn't merely challenge comfort, it threatened survival. For many modern viewers, the idea of sleeping outside in freezing temperatures without a fire feels almost unimaginable. Fire symbolizes warmth, safety, and the basic human instinct to push back against the dark. Yet Roman soldiers were often required to rest through winter nights without the comfort of flames. Fires risked exposing positions to enemies, releasing smoke into the night air, and breaking the discipline that defined the Roman military system. The absence of fire wasn't a small inconvenience. It was a strategic constraint with enormous consequences for morale and safety. To understand the severity of this problem, imagine the sensory reality: the stiffness of fingers numb from cold, the ache of joints resisting movement, the crisp bite of air that left breath hanging like a fragile cloud. These soldiers did not have modern insulated materials, thermal layers, or engineered sleeping systems. Their survival depended on knowledge passed down through experience, practiced routines, and a shared understanding that the cold would never be kind. Every night meant facing a silent opponent that waited patiently for weakness. But this harshness is exactly what makes the Roman soldiers' endurance so compelling. Their ability to adapt to freezing conditions reveals a combination of ingenuity, discipline, and the remarkable resilience of human beings when placed in difficult circumstances. This section begins the journey of uncovering how they managed to rest without the warmth of fire, how they protected themselves from the cold, and how they turned their limited resources into surprisingly effective tools for survival. The winter problem wasn't just a physical challenge, it shaped their psychological landscape as well. Nights were long, quiet, and filled with an unease that intensified when cold settled into their bones. Sleep was something they had to earn despite discomfort. In these dark hours, the soldiers' resilience wasn't expressed in heroic action, but in the quiet determination to endure discomfort that could not be avoided. This opening frames the central mystery of the entire story. It invites viewers not simply to learn facts, but to place themselves in the footsteps of soldiers who faced winters with courage and resourcefulness. By understanding the brutal reality of their environment, the viewer can fully appreciate the remarkable strategies that allowed Roman soldiers to survive nights that seem impossible by today's standards. Summary: this section sets the foundation by immersing the viewer in the intense, unforgiving winter conditions Roman soldiers faced and establishing the central mystery of how they managed to sleep without fire. Why fire was not an option. Fire is one of humanity's oldest protections against the night, a source of warmth, reassurance, and visibility. Yet for Roman soldiers stationed on dangerous frontiers, these same qualities turned fire into a liability. While the warmth of a campfire could ease the harshness of winter, the light it produced could betray their position instantly. In regions where dense forests concealed unpredictable enemies and rival tribes moved silently through the darkness, even the faintest glow could signal vulnerability. For this reason, commanders often enforced strict rules: no flames after dark, no sparks escaping into the night, and no careless comfort that might risk the entire unit. The Roman military understood the risks fire posed far better than many modern observers. An open flame could be seen from great distances, especially across snowy terrain or through the gaps between trees. On the edges of the empire, where Roman patrols encountered raiders skilled in surprise attacks, visibility could become fatal. A single fire might illuminate silhouettes of tents or reveal troop numbers, offering crucial intelligence to anyone watching. In the wrong moment, warmth could turn into a beacon for danger. Smoke presented another threat. Even on nights without wind, smoke tended to rise, drifting like a silent messenger announcing presence. In humid climates such as Britannia, it clung to the air longer than expected. Roman soldiers could not afford to send signals into the forest canopy where hidden scouts might be waiting. The discipline to avoid fire was not born from cruelty, but from a deep understanding of how quickly a preventable mistake could escalate into catastrophe. Commanders valued caution over comfort because the stakes were simply too high. Beyond visibility, fire created structural vulnerabilities. Camps became noisier and more relaxed when flames flickered. People gathered, voices rose, and attention drifted. This atmosphere, peaceful in civilian life, threatened military readiness. Roman soldiers had to remain alert throughout the night, with guards rotating in strict sequence. Introducing fire could weaken discipline, reduce focus, and allow complacency to take root. To maintain cohesion, commanders enforced uniformity. If one tent couldn't have fire, then none could. Solidarity in discomfort kept morale stable. Despite these strict limitations, soldiers understood the reasoning. They knew that fire was not forbidden to punish them, but to protect them. In the silence of winter nights, when the only sounds were rustling branches and distant animal calls, soldiers relied on darkness as a shield. The night, though cold and unforgiving, offered concealment. By resisting the instinct to light a flame, they embraced the strategic advantage of blending with the landscape. This section heightens the central mystery by presenting the dilemma clearly. Fire would have made winter bearable, but using it was too dangerous. The Romans chose safety over comfort, and this decision deepened the challenge of surviving cold nights without heat. Summary: this section explains the strategic reasons fire was forbidden at night, emphasizing how visibility, smoke, noise, and discipline shaped the Roman approach to winter survival. The brutality of Roman winter camps. Winter in Roman frontier camps was not a gentle presence. It pressed against every surface, seeped into every gap, and claimed every moment of stillness. For soldiers living in these conditions, cold was not something to endure occasionally, it was a constant companion. The wind sharpened as it swept through open plains, carrying with it the sting of ice crystals that settled on armor and fabric. Even the simple act of breathing became a reminder of the environment's severity, as each exhale released a visible cloud that dissolved into the frigid air. The world felt stripped of softness, leaving only the hard edges of survival. The ground itself contributed to the harshness. Frozen earth offered no comfort, turning each step into a jarring thud and making rest a battle rather than a relief. When soldiers laid down to sleep, the chilled ground pulled warmth from their bodies with relentless efficiency. Without proper insulation, merely lying still became a risk. The cold traveled upward, numbing limbs and tightening muscles, forcing soldiers to fight against discomfort from the moment they attempted to rest. It was not simply cold, it was a cold that worked against them, stealing energy bit by bit. The environment added layers of difficulty beyond temperature alone. Snowfall did more than blanket the landscape. It added weight to tents, hardened over sleeping areas, and soaked through clothing as it melted. Dampness combined with low temperatures created conditions far more dangerous than dry cold. Snow blown into tents during storms added a sense of disorder, leaving gear, cloaks, and personal items coated in moisture that became increasingly difficult to remove. For soldiers who already faced long days of marching and guarding, these extra burdens made each night feel even longer. Darkness amplified the hardship. Winter nights stretched far beyond the length of summer evenings, often plunging the camp into extended periods of stillness. Without fire to break the monotony, the night felt heavier and more oppressive. Silence was not comforting. It was a reminder of vulnerability. Every rustle outside the tent could trigger alertness, and every gust of wind carried uncertainty. In this environment, the mental strain deepened the physical discomfort, intertwining fatigue with unease. Despite these conditions, Roman soldiers were expected to maintain discipline. Sleep was not an escape, but a necessity. They had to make work under demanding circumstances. Their tents, made of leather stitched together, offered limited protection. They kept out some wind and precipitation, but they could not block the raw intensity of winter. Within these cramped shelters, soldiers relied on routine and resilience to endure nights that seemed designed to test their limits. Understanding this brutality is essential to appreciating how impressive their survival strategies were. When viewed through modern eyes, the Roman winter camp appears almost unimaginably harsh, yet soldiers faced it with determination. This unyielding environment created the backdrop against which their resourcefulness would shine. The structure of the Roman night in a Roman military camp was far from quiet rest. It operated as a carefully controlled system designed to maintain order and readiness, even in the most unforgiving winters. The Roman army divided the night into distinct watches, each managed by rotating guards who ensured that discipline never slipped and that the camp remained alert. Soldiers did not simply lie down and sleep through the darkness. Instead, they experienced the night in segments, shaped by duty, routine, and the constant awareness that danger could emerge without warning. This structure gave rhythm to the long winter hours and defined how soldiers approached rest. The night was divided into 4 major shifts called vigiliae. Each one represented a portion of the night in which assigned guards remained awake, patrolling the camp's perimeter or standing at fixed positions. These soldiers carried the responsibility of keeping the camp safe, and the rest of the unit depended on their vigilance. While one group remained alert, the others attempted to rest, though their sleep was seldom deep or uninterrupted. The rotation kept everyone engaged in the larger mission of survival, reinforcing the idea that no individual could detach from the collective needs of the legion. For the soldiers waiting their turn to rest, sleep came in limited segments. They often fell asleep knowing they would be woken again for their watch. This pattern created a fragmented sleep cycle, where short bursts of rest replaced the continuous sleep modern people expect. Although this might seem exhausting, it also offered one unexpected advantage during winter. Soldiers did not remain still long enough for the cold to penetrate too deeply. Every few hours, movement resumed, helping to reignite body heat and prevent the dangerous cooling effect that prolonged stillness could create. Within each tent, men adjusted their sleep to this rhythm. They nestled together in close quarters, understanding that warmth came not only from their cloaks, but from shared body heat. When one soldier rose for duty, others shifted to reclaim the available space, creating a constant, subtle movement that kept the interior from falling completely silent or stagnant. This dynamic helped maintain a sense of connection, even in the darkest hours. The flow of the night was built on cooperation rather than isolation. Outside, the environment shaped the experience further. The absence of fire meant that guards relied on moonlight, starlight, or simple familiarity with their surroundings to navigate. Their eyes adapted to shadows, and their ears became attuned to faint sounds. This heightened awareness influenced how soldiers inside the tent slept, knowing their safety rested on the alertness of those on watch. This trust, blended with discipline, created a unique nighttime atmosphere, part tension, part routine, part endurance. Understanding how the Roman night was structured reveals why their sleeping strategies were so essential. Rest was never guaranteed, and conditions were far from ideal, yet the system kept the army functioning in even the harshest winters. Their ability to adapt to this rhythm laid the foundation for the survival methods that follow. Cloaks as portable bedrolls. The Roman cloak, known as the sagum, served as much more than a garment. It became a soldier's shield against winter nights, functioning as a portable bedroll that offered warmth in conditions where fire was forbidden. Made from thick, coarse wool, the sagum was intentionally designed to trap heat while enduring rough environments. Its fibers were densely woven, allowing it to retain warmth even when exposed to moisture. This single piece of clothing became one of the most effective tools soldiers possessed, turning body heat into a resource that could be preserved through long winter nights. The cloak's design was deceptively simple, a rectangular piece of heavy wool fastened with a brooch or pin. Yet within that simplicity lay remarkable efficiency. Wool, a naturally insulating material, contains countless tiny air pockets that hold warmth close to the body. When wrapped tightly around a soldier, the cloak created a barrier that slowed the escape of heat, essentially forming a personal shelter. Its surface repelled light rain and snow, and its thickness protected against harsh winds that swept across Roman frontiers. For many soldiers, the sagum was the only dependable layer between themselves and the freezing night air. At bedtime, the cloak transformed into a sleeping cover. Soldiers would spread part of it on the ground to soften the hardness of the earth, then wrap the remaining portion tightly around themselves. This method allowed them to conserve as much warmth as possible, minimizing the surface area exposed to the cold. In cramped tents shared with several others, each soldier's cloak contributed to a collective environment where body heat accumulated in the enclosed space. Individually, the cloak made survival bearable. Together, these wool coverings created a shared pocket of warmth. The sagam's durability also played a key role in its usefulness. Soldiers marched for hours, carried heavy loads, and confronted unpredictable weather, yet the cloak withstood constant wear. Over time, softened slightly, molding to the wearer's body and becoming more comfortable. The reliability of this garment made it a silent companion through the most demanding winters. In the absence of luxuries, the sagum represented both practicality and a sense of security. Its presence offered reassurance that, no matter how harsh the night became, they had at least one tool designed to protect them. The cloak's importance was so widely recognized that it became part of a soldier's essential identity. It was associated with readiness, endurance, and the ability to withstand harsh conditions without complaint. Modern viewers may overlook how transformative a single piece of wool can be, but for Roman soldiers, it was a lifeline. The sagum embodies the efficiency and resilience of the Roman military system, demonstrating how a simple garment could help men survive nights that seemed impossible without fire. Layering and garment engineering. A Roman soldier's survival in harsh winter conditions depended heavily on the thoughtful engineering of his clothing. While the cloak served as a vital outer layer, the garments worn underneath played an equally important role in retaining warmth. Roman military attire wasn't accidental. It evolved through decades of campaigning across diverse climates. Soldiers learned to rely on a system of layers that balanced mobility, durability, and insulation. Each piece of clothing complemented the others, forming a protective envelope designed to keep the body functioning even in freezing temperatures. The foundation of this system was the tunic, typically made from wool. Though lightweight compared to the cloak, the tunic provided consistent insulation. Wool fibers trapped warm air close to the skin, creating a natural barrier against cold winds. Some soldiers opted for a double-layered tunic during winter, giving themselves an extra buffer that made a noticeable difference during long nights. Beneath the tunic, simple undergarments added another layer of insulation, further reducing heat loss without restricting movement. Over the tunic, many soldiers wore the subarmalis, a padded vest traditionally used beneath armor. While its primary purpose was to soften the impact of metal plates or chain, it also offered valuable warmth. The layers of fabric and stitching acted like rudimentary quilting, capturing heat in small pockets that stayed close to the body. Though not designed specifically for cold weather, the subarmalis became an unexpected but practical winter defense, contributing to the overall insulation system. Footwear played a significant role as well. Roman hobnail boots, though durable, were not naturally warm, especially in winter. To counter this, soldiers filled their footwear with wool or wrapped their feet in cloth strips. These makeshift liners reduced heat loss and protected against numbness during long marches. In particularly cold regions, archaeological evidence suggests that some soldiers wore woolen socks, providing extra insulation that made the frigid ground more tolerable. Layering wasn't just about adding thickness, it was about creating a combination that allowed for comfort, movement, and breathability. Too many layers trapped moisture, which intensified the threat of hypothermia. The Romans understood this balance intuitively, favoring materials that naturally managed moisture while maintaining warmth. Wool's ability to insulate even when damp made it the material of choice for most garments. Its resilience ensured that clothing retained its shape and protective qualities even after repeated wear in severe weather. The system of layered garments allowed soldiers to withstand temperatures that might otherwise seem insurmountable. Each layer served a purpose, regulating warmth, managing moisture, protecting skin from friction, and supporting long hours of physical activity. Together, they formed a unified defense that helped soldiers endure winter nights without the comfort of fire. The engineering behind their clothing demonstrates not only practicality, but also the adaptability of the Roman military system. Field tents and sleeping arrangements. Roman field tents, known as papilio or contubernum tents, played a critical role in helping soldiers endure winter nights without fire. Constructed primarily from tightly stitched leather panels, these tents were far more resilient than their simple appearance suggested. The thick leather created a sturdy barrier that shielded occupants from wind and precipitation, while its weight helped keep the tent stable during storms. Although not fully insulated in the modern sense, the structure trapped enough warmth generated by the soldiers themselves to make the interior significantly less hostile than the open night air. Inside the tent, sleeping arrangements were carefully organized. A standard tent housed 8 soldiers, all belonging to the same contubernum, the smallest unit of Roman military life. This close grouping was not accidental, but the result of a system designed for both efficiency and survival. The limited space meant that body heat collected quickly, creating a micro-environment that grew warmer as more soldiers settled in for the night. Even though the temperature never became comfortably warm, the collective heat made a noticeable difference, offering a level of protection that could not be achieved by a soldier sleeping alone. The structure of the tent contributed to this effect in several ways. Its low ceiling minimized the amount of space that needed to be warm. Unlike modern camping tents, which emphasize comfort and roominess, Roman tents prioritized heat retention and practical function. By limiting vertical space, the tent allowed warmth to concentrate closer to the soldiers' bodies. The leather material, while not fully airtight, reduced wind penetration enough to dull the sharpest gusts. In winter, every reduction in airflow created a safer and more tolerable sleeping environment. The interior layout followed a consistent pattern. Soldiers placed their gear near the edges and created a central area where their bedding arrangements overlapped slightly. This positioning allowed them to take advantage of shared warmth without creating discomfort or confusion in the small space. The closeness also reinforced camaraderie, making the tent not just a shelter, but a shared refuge where each man depended on the others for survival. Through these nightly routines, bonds formed that would influence morale and cooperation during waking hours. The tent's entrance was usually kept low and narrow, helping minimize drafts. Soldiers could adjust the flap to control airflow, keeping it barely open on colder nights while ensuring ventilation remained sufficient to prevent moisture buildup. Proper ventilation mattered, especially in winter, because trapped moisture could dampen clothing and bedding, dramatically increasing the risk of hypothermia. The Romans' awareness of this balance reveals their practical understanding of how to maintain a livable interior environment even with limited materials. Understanding the design and function of these tents highlights how Roman soldiers transformed their immediate surroundings into workable shelters. While far from luxurious, these structures played a crucial role in mitigating winter's severity and enabled soldiers to rest despite the absence of fire. Shared heat and the power of the contubernum, one of the most effective tools Roman soldiers relied on during winter nights, had nothing to do with clothing or equipment. It was the simple, powerful presence of each other. The contubernum, the smallest cohesive group within the Roman army, functioned as both a practical and emotional foundation for survival. 8 men shared the same tent, marched together, worked together, and faced the same challenges. This closeness created familiarity, trust, and teamwork that extended naturally into the way they slept. In winter, their shared proximity became an essential resource that helped them endure the cold without fire. The warmth generated by 8 bodies in a confined space made a significant difference. Leather tents trapped the rising heat, and with soldiers lying close together, warmth accumulated steadily through the night. Body heat, often overlooked in modern discussions about survival, played a crucial role in keeping Roman soldiers alive. The collective insulation created by this arrangement was far more effective than anything a single soldier could manage. Each man contributed to a shared pool of warmth, and in doing so, they created conditions that allowed for rest even when the temperature outside dropped below freezing. Sleeping positions further enhanced this effect. Soldiers arranged themselves strategically, often aligning shoulder to shoulder or alternating their orientations so feet and heads could share warmth more evenly. These positions were not rigid rules, but evolved naturally from experience. Men learned how to conserve heat through trial and necessity, adopting arrangements that allowed the entire group to benefit. The intentional closeness fostered a sense of unity. Each soldier understood that the warmth he received was partly provided by those around him, making solidarity a literal source of survival. Beyond the physical warmth, the shared sleeping environment contributed significantly to morale. Winter nights were long, quiet, and mentally taxing. Knowing that others were close provided comfort and reduced the sense of isolation that often accompanies extreme conditions. The soft movements, steady breathing, and presence of comrades helped ease the psychological burden. This sense of connection became as important as physical warmth, encouraging resilience in the face of discomfort and fatigue. Daily routines reinforced this closeness. After long marches or exhausting labor, returning to the tent meant returning to a familiar, dependable group. The contubernium became a miniature family within the larger army. Shared tasks, shared struggles, and shared rest combined to create bonds that strengthened discipline and cooperation. These bonds, formed in the cold darkness, influenced how soldiers worked together during the day. Winter survival, therefore, was not just about individual endurance, but about collective strength. The Romans recognized the value of this arrangement. The contubernium wasn't just an administrative decision, it was a human system designed to maximize cohesion and increase the chances that every soldier made it through the night. The warmth they created together reflects a deeper truth. Survival in the harshest conditions often depends on unity as much as on equipment. The science of ancient warmth. A Roman soldier's first and most reliable source of warmth was not fire, clothing, or shelter, it was the heat generated by his own body. While they lacked modern scientific terminology, Roman soldiers intuitively understood how movement, exertion, and breath created warmth that could be preserved during winter nights. The body's internal heat production, created through constant physical activity, became a powerful asset in environments where cold threatened every moment of rest. Their survival depended on recognizing this natural resource and learning how to retain the warmth they worked hard to produce throughout the day. Roman military life was physically demanding, especially in frontier regions. Soldiers marched long distances carrying heavy packs, dug fortifications, constructed camps, and trained vigorously. This level of exertion kept their blood circulating, raised their core temperature, and strengthened their bodies against the cold. Unlike modern individuals, who may spend large portions of the day sitting still, Roman soldiers rarely stopped moving. Their daily routines built a foundation of warmth that lingered even after the sun set and temperatures dropped further. After completing their tasks, the heat generated through hours of labor remained trapped in their muscles and clothing. Rather than cooling off completely before resting, soldiers often transitioned directly from activity to preparation for sleep. This timing was crucial. Their bodies carried residual warmth into the tents, creating a buffer against the freezing air. The knowledge that physical effort translated into nighttime warmth encouraged disciplined routines. Soldiers learned to value the heat produced through work, recognizing that their own bodies were powerful tools for survival. Breathing also played a subtle but important role. During the day, deep breaths drawn from exertion warmed the body's interior. At night, slow breaths within the tent helped maintain a shared warmth. The presence of multiple individuals exhaling warm air in a confined space helped raise the temperature slightly, making the environment more bearable. Although this increase was modest, every degree mattered in a winter setting, where small advantages could mean the difference between discomfort and danger. Muscle activity carried additional benefits. When soldiers tensed or shifted during the night, they generated small amounts of heat that helped maintain circulation. Sleep in winter was not always restful or motionless. Instead, soldiers adapted by adjusting their positions frequently, allowing warmth to circulate through their bodies more effectively. This constant but subtle movement prevented their limbs from becoming dangerously cold. Understanding the body as a heat generator allowed soldiers to survive conditions that might otherwise seem impossible. They recognized that warmth was something they created through effort and preserved through discipline. Their daily routines were not simply about fulfilling military duties, they laid the foundation for surviving the unforgiving nights that followed. This section shows that Roman soldiers combined instinct and experience to tap into the most consistent heat source available, themselves. Pre-sleep warm-up routines before settling down to sleep in the freezing conditions of winter. Roman soldiers unintentionally practiced a form of warm-up routine that helped prepare their bodies for the long, cold night ahead. These routines were not formal exercises or structured workouts, but simply the natural tasks that filled the final moments of their day. Yet these tasks created just enough exertion to increase circulation, raise body temperature, and trap warmth beneath their layers of wool and leather. What modern viewers might consider minor movements became essential strategies for conserving heat when fire was not an option. As evening approached, soldiers engaged in a series of activities meant to close out the day's duties. They tightened equipment straps, repaired small tears in cloaks or tunics, organized supplies, and checked the condition of their weapons. Each of these actions involved bending, lifting, stretching, or twisting movements that helped prevent the body from cooling too quickly after the day's exertion. By staying active until the last moment, soldiers transitioned into the night with their internal temperature slightly elevated, giving them a crucial advantage once they lay down to sleep. Another part of this routine involved tending to their footwear and leg bindings. Soldiers brushed away mud, adjusted woolen wrappings, and ensured their feet were as dry as possible. These seemingly mundane tasks required moderate effort, which helped maintain warmth in extremities that were particularly vulnerable to cold. Through repetitive movement, blood continued to flow steadily, reducing the risk of numbness that could make sleep even more uncomfortable. Social interaction also contributed to their pre-sleep warmth. Soldiers often discussed the day, exchanged quick remarks, or shared small jokes as they completed their tasks. Although not physically strenuous, these interactions kept them mentally alert and prevented them from sitting still too early. This slight delay before resting allowed their bodies to retain heat generated throughout the day and through their final chores. In a winter environment, maintaining warmth was not just a matter of comfort, but a matter of ensuring that the coming hours would be survivable. Once inside the tent, final adjustments continued. Soldiers arranged their cloaks, shifted gear to create makeshift padding, and helped each other secure their bedding positions. These movements might seem small, but every motion contributed to circulation. The difference between lying down fully warmed versus cooling off for even a short period was significant, particularly when outside temperatures hovered near freezing. Soldiers learned that efficiency and timing mattered. By completing these routines without long pauses, they ensured the warmth they carried into sleep lasted as long as possible. These pre-sleep activities were not recognized as survival tactics in the way we might label them today, yet they served that purpose effectively. The Romans relied on instinct and discipline rather than technical knowledge, transforming everyday movements into a vital component of winter endurance. Their routines demonstrate that survival often comes from understanding one's own body and responding to the environment through simple, consistent actions. Sleep positioning for maximum warmth. Sleeping arrangements inside a Roman tent were far from random. Over time, soldiers learned that the way they positioned themselves could dramatically influence how much warmth they retained through the night. The cold was not merely uncomfortable, it was a persistent force that sought out weaknesses in their posture, clothing, and exposure. To counter this, soldiers adopted sleep positions that maximized shared heat, protected vulnerable areas of the body, and maintained circulation. These positions evolved naturally, born out of experience and necessity rather than formal instruction, becoming an essential part of winter survival. One common approach involved soldiers lying side by side, closely aligned from shoulder to hip. This arrangement reduced the amount of exposed surface area and allowed body heat to move efficiently between individuals. Because warmth radiates outward, the closer two bodies were positioned, the more effectively they could preserve it. This simple method created a living barrier against the cold, strengthening the tent's insulating effect. Each man contributed to the shared pool of warmth, benefiting both himself and those around him. Another technique involved alternating positions so that heads and feet were ranged in opposite directions. This pattern distributed warmth more evenly, ensuring that no single area became excessively cold. Feet, particularly vulnerable to nighttime chill, were warmed by proximity to another soldier's torso or upper body, where heat was naturally higher. By rotating orientations, soldiers developed a balanced environment where warmth was exchanged continuously. This arrangement also prevented heat from escaping too quickly, creating a more stable thermal pocket inside the tent. The center of the tent was often considered the warmest position, especially during winter. Less experienced or physically smaller soldiers were sometimes placed in the middle, shielded by the bodies of others. This arrangement ensured that everyone benefited from the collective warmth, while providing additional protection to those who needed it most. The outer positions, closer to the tent walls, were typically taken by soldiers accustomed to harsher conditions or those with stronger resistance to cold. The subtle system of placement demonstrated the group's awareness of how to use their structure to ensure maximum survival. Movement also played a role. Soldiers did not remain entirely still throughout the night. Shifting, adjusting cloaks, or tightening their wraps generated small bursts of heat that helped maintain circulation. These natural movements, although minimal, kept their muscles from stiffening and prevented cold from settling too deeply. The combination of strategic positioning and subtle activity created a dynamic environment that fought against the cold rather than surrendering to it. These sleep formations reinforced the sense of unity within the contubernium. Each man depended on the others not just for companionship, but for literal warmth. Their shared resting patterns reflected their shared purpose, demonstrating how cooperation became an invisible yet essential shield against winter. Through strategic positioning, they transformed their bodies into tools of survival, proving that even in the absence of fire, teamwork offered powerful protection. Worn fatigue as a natural insulator. One of the most unexpected factors that helped Roman soldiers endure winter nights was the simple weight of exhaustion. Their days were filled with demanding marches, heavy labor, and strict routines that left little room for rest. By nightfall, fatigue settled deeply into their muscles, creating a kind of heaviness that made sleep unavoidable, even in harsh conditions. This exhaustion didn't eliminate the cold, but it dulled the body's sensitivity to discomfort long enough for soldiers to drift into rest. Fatigue acted as a natural insulator, not in the physical sense, but in the mental and emotional sense that allowed soldiers to endure conditions that would overwhelm someone more alert or sensitive. The Roman soldiers' daily routine was built around intense physical effort. Marching miles across uneven terrain, carrying weapons and gear, digging fortifications, gathering supplies, and performing repetitive drills all demanded a high level of endurance. This constant activity generated heat throughout the day, warming bones and tissues even as the cold pressed in from the outside. By evening, soldiers carried residual warmth in their bodies, a lingering echo of the day's exertion. When they finally lay down to sleep, fatigue allowed them to overlook the discomfort of cold surfaces and stiff bedding. Exhaustion also helped soldiers fall asleep faster. In extreme cold, falling asleep quickly is a significant advantage. A mind weighed down by fatigue spends less time focusing on the sting of cold air or the ache of chilled limbs. Instead, it drifts toward rest almost automatically. Soldiers came to rely on this effect. The day's harsh efforts, while tiring, provided a sense of assurance that sleep would come regardless of the conditions surrounding them. For many, it was the only predictable part of the winter routine. Sleep quality in winter was rarely ideal, but fatigue helped soldiers achieve deeper moments of rest. Even short bursts of sleep, made more meaningful by exhaustion, offered restoration. Combined with shared warmth inside the tent, these periods allowed soldiers to recover enough to face the next day. Without the numbing effect of fatigue, winter nights would have felt for longer and colder. Beyond physical exhaustion, mental fatigue also played a role. The constant demands of vigilance, discipline, and responsibility left soldiers mentally drained. This mental weariness reduced the amount of energy available for worrying about the cold. Their minds, overwhelmed by the day's tasks, lacked the capacity to dwell on discomfort. This mental quietness made falling asleep easier and maintained a sense of acceptance that helped them endure long nights. The cumulative effect of fatigue illustrates that survival depended on more than materials and techniques. It depended on the soldier's ability to push through discomfort using the strength of routine and the momentum of the day. Though exhaustion might seem like a vulnerability, it became a surprising ally. It softened the sharp edge of winter, turning harsh nights into something soldiers could manage rather than fear. Strategic camp placement surviving winter began long before Roman soldiers laid down to sleep. Much of their ability to endure freezing nights without fire depended on where their camp was placed. Roman engineers, known for their discipline and precision, understood that terrain could either protect or endanger a unit. Choosing the right location was not a matter of convenience, but a calculated decision shaped by experience, environmental awareness, and the need to conserve warmth. Winter transformed the landscape into both an ally and an adversary, and the Romans learned to read its cues with remarkable skill. One of the first considerations was shelter from the wind. Open plains and exposed ridges intensified cold, allowing frigid gusts to sweep unbroken across the camp. Engineers avoided these areas whenever possible, seeking natural barriers such as hillsides, wooded groves, or shallow depressions. These features disrupted wind patterns, reducing the direct impact on tents and sleeping areas. A simple shift in placement could mean the difference between a relatively manageable night and one filled with relentless, draining cold. The Romans understood that terrain was a silent protector, offering warmth without a single flame. Another consideration was the stability of the ground. Frozen soil could be workable, but areas prone to collecting moisture, like marshes or riverbanks, were dangerous. Moisture combined with cold created conditions that increased the risk of hypothermia. Engineers sought higher, slightly sloped areas where snowmelt and rainwater drained naturally. This reduced dampness inside the camp and prevented water from pooling beneath tents. Dry ground played a crucial role in maintaining warmth, as even a thin layer of moisture could strip heat away rapidly during the night. Roman engineers also evaluated tree lines and natural formations. Wooded areas offered more than wind protection. They created microclimates where temperatures dropped more slowly due to insulation provided by branches and trunks. These zones often felt slightly warmer and helped shield the camp from the sharpest gusts. However, engineers balanced this advantage with the risk of ambush, ensuring that visibility remained sufficient. Their choices reflected a blend of practicality and caution, placing warmth and safety on equal footing. The proximity to resources also mattered. Soldiers needed materials for tent insulation, bedding layers, and ground cover. Positioning the camp near forests or areas with brush allowed them to gather what they needed efficiently. This reduced exposure time during collection and strengthened their nighttime defenses. Every minute saved from wandering in the cold translated into better warmth conservation once night fell. Strategic placement did more than provide physical comfort, it influenced morale. A well-positioned camp offered a sense of security and stability that eased the mental strain of winter. Knowing they were sheltered by the landscape itself gave soldiers confidence as they prepared for rest. This combination of environmental awareness and engineering expertise allowed Roman units to turn the land into a silent companion, aiding them through winter nights that would otherwise be intolerable. Internal camp layout for heat efficiency. The structure of a Roman camp was not only a testament to military discipline, it was a carefully engineered environment designed to protect soldiers from the natural elements. During winter, the internal layout of the camp played a significant role in creating pockets of warmth and reducing exposure to the cold. Every row of tents, every pathway, and every barrier was arranged with purpose. The camp was built each evening with remarkable speed, yet the precision was so consistent that even small adjustments had meaningful effects on the temperature within its boundaries. One of the most important aspects of the layout was the arrangement of tents in tightly ordered rows. This formation minimized open spaces where wind could gather momentum. By narrowing the pathways between tents, the layout restricted airflow, softening the force of cold gusts that might otherwise cut through the camp without resistance. This design created a subtle but valuable buffer that helped retain warmth. Even though temperatures remained low, reducing wind exposure meant soldiers experienced less heat loss during the night. The density of the tent formations also created a shared warming effect. As multiple tents clustered together, they formed a compact block that trapped more heat than isolated shelters could. The combined warmth from soldiers inside each tent contributed to a marginally warmer environment between the structures. In winter conditions, even a slight increase in temperature could influence comfort and survival. The Romans understood this intuitively, constructing their camps in ways that layered protection through proximity. The layout also prioritized functionality and efficiency. Tents belonging to the same century or cohort were grouped strategically, allowing soldiers to respond quickly to orders or emergencies without unnecessary exposure. This organization reduced the time spent walking through cold, open spaces when transitioning from one duty to another. Shorter distances meant less time spent losing body heat and helped maintain a steady rhythm that supported nighttime endurance. Barriers and fortifications added another layer of protection. The surrounding ramparts and ditches created a perimeter that deflected wind, especially at ground level. Inside this shielded zone, the air remained slightly calmer, providing an additional layer of environmental stability. Even though these structures were primarily defensive, their secondary effects on warmth demonstrated the Romans' ability to create multifunctional designs that supported both security and comfort. The internal camp layout also influenced morale. Soldiers felt safer and more supported when sheltered by familiar structure and order. The consistency of the design reassured them that their environment was controlled, even when winter threatened their endurance. This mental comfort translated into physical resilience, helping soldiers rest with fewer anxieties. The visible organization of the camp reminded them that they were part of a system designed to protect them. By understanding how the internal layout shaped heat retention, it becomes clear that Roman camps were more than temporary shelters. They were carefully planned environments that combined strategic thinking with practical survival. The order and density of the tents played a significant role in shielding soldiers from the worst of winter's effects. Earthworks, ramparts, and ditches. Roman military engineering extended far beyond tents and pathways. At the heart of every temporary camp were the earthworks, ramparts, ditches, and raised embankments that defined its perimeter. While their primary purpose was defensive, these structures also provided essential protection from winter's harsh winds. Built with impressive speed and precision, they transformed open terrain into a fortified environment that offered soldiers a more stable and sheltered place to rest. In the freezing conditions of frontier regions, these earthworks acted as barriers between the soldiers and the raw force of winter. The ditch, or fossa, dug around the camp served multiple functions. Its depth and shape created a low barrier that disrupted cold air currents flowing across the ground. Wind sweeping over open land often moved in strong, unbroken streams, chilling anything in its path. The ditch interrupted this flow, forcing the wind upward or slowing it down before it reached the interior of the camp. Even though the change was subtle, any reduction in wind speed helped prevent heat from being stripped away from tents and sleeping soldiers. The ditch also marked a psychological boundary, reinforcing the idea that the camp itself was a protected space. Above the ditch rose the agger, a raised earthen wall constructed from the soil dug out during ditch creation. Soldiers packed the earth firmly, forming a stable embankment that stood between the camp and the surrounding terrain. In winter, this structure became an invaluable windbreak. The agger's height blocked the lower, colder layers of air that swept along the ground, reducing drafts and minimizing direct exposure. When combined with the tightly grouped tents inside, this barrier created a noticeable improvement in living conditions. It acted like a shield, dulling the sharpest gusts before they could penetrate the camp. On top of the agger, soldiers often placed a fence of sharpened stakes known as a vallum. While designed for defense, these stakes also contributed indirectly to wind resistance. By breaking up air patterns and creating additional friction, they reduced the speed of wind passing over the rampart. The combined effect of ditch, embankment, and stakes formed a layered system that softened winter's impact before it reached the camp's living areas. The earthworks did more than protect the tents. They stabilized the environment within the camp. Wind exposure creates significant drops in perceived temperature, making cold conditions feel even more severe. By reducing wind speed and redirecting air currents, the earthworks improved the microclimate inside the camp, providing soldiers with better conditions for sleeping and performing nighttime duties. Even without fires, the camp structure offered a level of environmental control that made winter nights less punishing. These engineered barriers also shaped morale. Soldiers knew their camp was fortified not only against enemies, but against the elements. The ramparts and ditches symbolized security, giving them confidence as they faced winter nights that could otherwise undermine their resilience. In this way, engineering served both practical and psychological purposes, reinforcing the stability that soldiers needed to endure the cold. Ground preparation and insulation. The ground beneath a Roman soldier played a far greater role in winter survival than many people realize. Frozen earth absorbed body heat with relentless efficiency, making any contact with it a serious threat to comfort and safety. If a soldier lay directly on the cold ground, warmth would drain from his body far faster than it could be replaced, increasing the risk of numbness and hypothermia. To counter this, the Romans developed practical methods of preparing the ground before setting up their tents. These techniques transformed harsh, frozen soil into a surface capable of supporting rest, even without the aid of fire. The first step in preparing a campsite involved clearing away snow, frost, and debris. Soldiers used their tools to scrape off the top layer of frozen material, creating a clean and stable surface. Removing snow was essential because snow melted from body heat, leading to dampness that intensified cold exposure. By clearing this layer, soldiers prevented the moisture problem before it began. The ground became firmer and less likely to transfer cold directly into their bedding. Once the surface was cleared, soldiers added layers of natural insulation. Straw, dry grass, pine branches, or any available vegetation served as an effective barrier between their bodies and the frozen earth. These materials trapped small pockets of air that slowed heat loss, much like the insulating fibers in their wool cloaks. Even a modest layer made a noticeable difference. Soldiers often gathered whatever vegetation they could find during the final hours of daylight, knowing it would help them retain precious warmth through the night. The placement of these insulating materials was strategic. Soldiers spread vegetation evenly across the sleeping area to prevent gaps that could expose sections of the body to the cold ground. In the absence of vegetation, they sometimes used spare cloaks, sacks, or woven mats to create a similar effect. The tent's interior layout was adjusted so that the warmest spots, usually the central areas, were given the thickest layers of insulation. As the soldiers lay close together, their combined body heat warmed the insulated surface beneath them, creating a more stable and comfortable microclimate. Moisture management was another key consideration. Frozen ground often became damp as temperatures fluctuated or as soldiers' body heat softened the soil. The insulation layer absorbed some of this moisture, keeping it away from their clothing and bedding. Because wool retained warmth even when slightly damp, the overall system worked efficiently, allowing soldiers to maintain warmth despite the challenging conditions. Ground preparation also carried a psychological benefit. Taking the time to create a more comfortable sleeping area gave soldiers a sense of control, helping them face the long night with greater confidence. The act of preparing the ground transformed an inhospitable environment into a functional shelter, demonstrating the Roman ability to turn simple resources into effective survival tools. Mental conditioning and discipline. For Roman soldiers, winter survival relied as much on the mind as on physical strategies. The ability to sleep through freezing nights without fire acquired a level of mental conditioning that had been forged through years of training, hardship, and discipline. Roman military culture taught soldiers to accept discomfort as an inevitable part of service, and this acceptance became a powerful asset during winter campaigns. Their psychological resilience did not remove the cold, but it shaped how they responded to it, allowing them to remain focused and functional when conditions became nearly unbearable. From the moment a recruit entered the ranks, he learned that discipline was not simply about obeying orders, it was a mindset. Soldiers were trained to suppress panic, endure pain, and maintain clarity even during adversity. This conditioning reduced the emotional impact of winter nights. Instead of reacting to every gust of cold with fear or frustration, soldiers approached the challenge with the grounded understanding that suffering was expected and temporary. This mental framework protected them from the overwhelming despair that harsh weather could inspire. Another key aspect of psychological endurance was routine. The Roman army relied heavily on structured schedules that left little time for uncertainty or anxiety. Each soldier knew what his tasks were, when he would perform them, and how the day would unfold. This rhythm carried into the night. Predictability provided mental stability, helping soldiers conserve emotional energy. When the environment was hostile and unpredictable, the familiarity of routine gave them a sense of control that countered the chaos of winter. Camaraderie strengthened their mental resilience even further. A soldier did not face winter alone. He faced it with his contubernium. The shared experience reinforced a collective mindset built on mutual support and responsibility. Knowing that others endured the same cold and discomfort helped mitigate feelings of isolation. This emotional connection created a subtle but important comfort, reminding each soldier that the challenge was shared, not solitary. The presence of comrades made the difference between feeling vulnerable and feeling supported. Discipline also shaped how soldiers processed discomfort. Instead of focusing on the cold, they focused on their duty. The Roman military emphasized purpose, honor, and commitment to the legion. These values redirected attention away from physical suffering. Even when the cold seeped through their cloaks and tightened their muscles, soldiers could anchor themselves in the knowledge that endurance was part of their identity. The mind's ability to frame discomfort as meaningful transformed their relationship with winter hardships. Finally, mental conditioning acted as a buffer against fear. Winter brought not only physical danger but also psychological threats. Darkness, isolation, and the constant awareness that enemies could strike. Yet discipline kept fear from overpowering reason. By maintaining emotional control, soldiers preserved the clarity needed to follow survival routines, make sound decisions, and protect themselves and others. Ultimately, mental resilience was not a secondary skill, but a central pillar of Roman winter survival. It allowed soldiers to endure conditions that would break many others, proving that strength of mind was just as vital as strength of body. Food as fuel in nighttime warmth. Food played a crucial yet often overlooked role in helping Roman soldiers withstand the freezing nights of winter. Nutrition was not merely a matter of keeping hunger at bay, it was a vital component of staying warm. The body generates heat as it digests food, and the Romans, through experience rather than science, understood that eating the right meal at the right time made a noticeable difference in nighttime endurance. Their evening rations became an essential source of warmth, offering both physical energy and psychological comfort before facing the cold hours ahead. The typical Roman military diet was simple but effective. Soldiers consumed grains in various forms, often as porridge or coarse bread. These grains provided slow-burning carbohydrates, which released energy steadily throughout the night. This sustained release created a mild but consistent source of internal warmth. Legumes added additional calories and nutrients, while cheese supplied fats that metabolized gradually. Even small amounts of meat, dried or salted, contributed to the process, giving soldiers the fuel needed to maintain body heat over long stretches of inactivity. Warm meals, when available, offered an immediate psychological boost. During daylight hours, small cooking fires were sometimes permitted, allowing soldiers to prepare warm broths or stews. These meals comforted both body and spirit, reinforcing morale before darkness set in. A warm meal heated the core, providing a temporary increase in internal temperature that could last well into the early part of the night. Even when fires were prohibited after sunset, the benefits of a meal eaten earlier lingered, creating a foundation of warmth that complemented their clothing and sleeping arrangements. Hydration also influenced warmth. Soldiers drank water, diluted wine, or warm herbal concoctions when possible. Proper hydration helped circulation, ensuring that warm blood reached extremities more effectively. Dry skin and dehydration could reduce body efficiency, making soldiers more susceptible to cold. The Romans recognized that maintaining fluid balance contributed to resilience, and evening drinks became part of their nightly preparation, even if they were simple or ration. Eating right before rest helped soldiers transition into sleep with the body actively producing heat. This natural metabolic process worked silently but significantly. For soldiers already fatigued by the day's efforts, the combination of exhaustion and food-induced warmth created conditions that made falling asleep easier despite the cold. Their bodies continued to release energy through digestion, providing a steady internal heater that required no fire and no additional effort. Food also offered emotional comfort. A satisfying meal, even a modest one, helped ease the mental strain of winter. The routine of eating together reinforced a sense of stability and unity within the contubernium. Sharing food reminded soldiers that they faced the night as a group, not as isolated individuals. This emotional grounding made the cold feel less overwhelming and strengthened the mental resilience essential for winter survival. Through simple, reliable meals, Roman soldiers used nutrition as a practical defense against the cold. Their diets provided the slow, consistent energy needed to sustain warmth, demonstrating that survival depended on thoughtful preparation long before the night began. Night watches and rotational rest cycles. Roman soldiers did not spend winter nights in uninterrupted sleep. Instead, they followed a strict system of rotational watches known as vigiliae. This structure divided the night into several segments, each assigned to different groups responsible for guarding the camp. While the system was designed primarily for security, it also served an unexpected role in winter survival. The rhythm of rising, moving, and returning to rest kept soldiers from remaining still for too long, preventing their bodies from cooling to dangerous levels. In this way, duty and survival worked hand in hand. The night was typically divided into 4 watches, each lasting approximately 3 hours. During their assigned watch, soldiers remained awake, patrolling the perimeter or standing guard at designated posts. Although the cold made this duty challenging, the physical activity involved provided one crucial benefit: movement. Even slow pacing helped generate heat, especially in the legs and core. Soldiers returned from their shifts feeling chilled but not frozen, their bodies warmed slightly by the effort required to stay alert. For those resting between watches, sleep came in phases rather than one long stretch. While fragmented, this sleep cycle offered its own advantages. Short periods of rest meant that soldiers were never inactive long enough for the cold to settle deeply into their muscles. Waking periodically allowed them to shift positions, rewrap their cloaks, and reconnect with the warmth generated by others in the tent. This constant resetting helped maintain a tolerable level of body heat throughout the night, reducing the risk of exposure that prolonged stillness could cause. The rotation system also added structure to the night, preventing the mental drift that can make cold feel even colder. Soldiers knew exactly when they would rise, when they would rest, and what responsibilities awaited them. This predictability reduced anxiety and kept their minds focused on manageable tasks. When a soldier's turn ended, he returned to the tent with a sense of accomplishment that helped ease the discomfort awaiting him. The shared understanding of the rotation reinforced group cohesion, reminding each member that winter survival was a collective effort. Communication between watches played a role in maintaining morale. As one group relieved another, quick exchanges of information or brief words of encouragement strengthened camaraderie. These small interactions broke up the monotony of winter nights and reinforced the sense of unity that defined the contubernium. The transition between watches became a moment of human connection amid the cold, helping soldiers feel supported and grounded. The rotation system also ensured that no soldier was left exposed for too long. Spread evenly among the group, the responsibility of guarding the camp prevented exhaustion from becoming overwhelming, while giving each soldier enough rest to maintain strength for the next day's demands. This balance of duty and recovery reflected the Roman approach to discipline: practical, structured, and focused on long-term sustainability. Through the rhythm of night watches, Roman soldiers managed to remain warm enough to survive, even without fire. Movement, structure, and teamwork transformed the coldest hours into manageable segments, proving that survival depended as much on routine as on resources. Coping with moisture, rain, and snow cold alone was difficult enough for Roman soldiers to endure, But when moisture entered the picture, the danger multiplied. Wet clothing, damp bedding, and melting snow accelerated heat loss to a degree that even the thickest wool cloak could not fully counter. In winter conditions, staying dry was not just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. The Romans understood this through harsh experience. Their methods for managing moisture reflected a deep awareness of how water, in any form, could undermine their ability to rest through the night. The first challenge came from the environment itself. Winter in many Roman frontier regions brought frequent rain, sleet, and snow. Soldiers often returned to camp soaked from a long march or an unexpected storm. Before settling in for the night, they did everything possible to remove moisture from their clothing. Cloaks and tunics were shaken out vigorously to shed excess water. Gear was wiped down, and snow was scraped away before it had a chance to melt. These actions may have seemed small, but they prevented wet fabric from clinging to the body and drawing away vital warmth. Inside the tent, soldiers took additional steps to control moisture. The leather walls blocked some precipitation, but condensation could still form on the interior during frigid nights. Soldiers learned to position their cloaks and bedding to avoid direct contact with the tent sides, where moisture tended to collect. Gear that had become slightly damp was placed closer to the center of the tent, where warmth from several bodies could speed the drying process. Even modest improvements helped reduce the threat that dampness posed. Footwear required special attention. Hobnail boots were durable, but not naturally waterproof. Soldiers often stuffed them with wool or wrapped their feet in cloth to absorb moisture and provide extra insulation. When possible, they removed their boots during sleep to let them air out, drying them slightly before the next day's march. This routine prevented cold, wet leather from sapping warmth from their feet, which were highly vulnerable to freezing conditions. Snow presented another challenge. When it blew into tents during storms, soldiers had to act quickly to remove it before it melted. Even small patches of melting snow could soak bedding and create cold pockets that made sleep more difficult. Soldiers brushed snow outside immediately, sometimes using shields as makeshift scoops. The faster they reacted, the more effectively they protected their limited dry surfaces. Moisture management also had a strong psychological effect. Taking control of their environment, even in small ways, helped soldiers feel more prepared for the night ahead. It gave them a sense of agency in conditions that were otherwise harsh and unpredictable. The act of drying gear, adjusting bedding, and organizing the tent space offered comfort through routine and reinforced their resilience. These methods, though simple, were vital. Moisture transformed cold into danger, and the Romans knew that defeating it required vigilance and discipline. Their practical approach to managing rain, snow, and dampness helped them preserve warmth and gave them a fighting chance at rest during winter nights without fire. The wool advantage. Wool was the silent hero of Roman winter survival. Without it, even the toughest soldiers would have struggled to endure nights on the frontier. Although the Romans lacked modern textile science, they understood through experience that wool possessed unique qualities that made it indispensable in cold weather. It kept them warm, protected them from wind, and continued to insulate even when damp. These characteristics transformed wool from a simple material into a lifeline, shaping how the Roman army outfitted its troops for the harshest environments. At the heart of wool's effectiveness were its natural insulating fibers. Each strand of wool contains tiny crimps that create countless air pockets when woven into fabric. These pockets trap heat close to the body, forming a barrier that slows the escape of warmth. Roman soldiers relied heavily on this natural insulation, wearing wool not only as cloaks but also as tunics, socks, wraps, and blankets. In winter, this material acted like a protective shell that kept their core temperature stable during long periods of rest. What made wool even more valuable was its ability to retain warmth even when wet. Unlike many fabrics that lose insulating power once moisture seeps in, wool fibers continue to trap heat, preventing rapid cooling. This trait proved essential for soldiers who faced frequent rain and snow. Even when the environment forced moisture into their clothing, wool softened the blow by preserving some warmth. It did not make wet conditions comfortable, but it dramatically reduced the risk of severe heat loss. Wool's breathability also contributed to its usefulness. The material could absorb moisture from sweat or melting snow, while still allowing excess humidity to escape. This prevented the buildup of dampness that could otherwise lead to chills. Soldiers could march, work, or sleep in wool without feeling as though their clothing trapped moisture against their skin. This balancing act between absorption and ventilation made wool ideal for the fluctuating conditions soldiers encountered during winter campaigns. Durability added to its practicality. Wool garments could withstand heavy use, constant friction from armor, and exposure to harsh weather without falling apart. Cloaks remained dependable even after months of continuous wear. Tunics maintained their integrity despite repeated strain. The resilience of wool made it a long-lasting material that could survive the demands of military life, saving soldiers from the risk of inadequate clothing during the coldest months. The comfort provided by wool had psychological value as well. In a life filled with rigid discipline and harsh conditions, a warm cloak or tunic offered a rare sense of relief. The reassuring weight and texture of wool helped soldiers feel secure, giving them confidence as they prepared for a winter night without fire. This subtle comfort mattered, reinforcing their morale and reminding them that their equipment was designed with their survival in mind. Wool was more than fabric, it was technology shaped by nature and perfected through Roman experience. Its insulating power, moisture resistance, and durability made it a cornerstone of winter survival, allowing soldiers to withstand challenges that might otherwise have overwhelmed them. Leather, fur, and supplementary materials. While wool formed the backbone of Roman winter clothing, it wasn't the only material that supported soldiers during harsh weather. Leather, fur, and various secondary textiles played essential roles in strengthening a soldier's protection against cold, wind, and moisture. These materials complemented wool by offering durability, wind resistance, and additional insulation where needed. Together, they formed a layered system that helped soldiers adapt to a range of winter conditions across the empire's diverse frontiers. Leather was one of the most versatile materials used in Roman military gear. It appeared in cloaks, belts, footwear, tent coverings, and protective armor components. Its natural density made it resistant to wind, an important attribute when strong winter gusts cut across the camp. Although leather was not known for providing warmth on its own, it acted as a shield that blocked cold air from penetrating inner layers of wool. This combination of insulation and wind protection helped soldiers maintain warmth, particularly during night watches when movement was minimal and exposure was prolonged. Fur provided another layer of valuable defense, especially in regions where winter temperatures reached extreme lows. While not standard issue throughout the empire, fur became more common in northern provinces where soldiers incorporated locally sourced pelts into their gear. Fur-lined collars, capes, and wraps helped protect vulnerable areas like the neck, shoulders, and upper body. The thick, plush texture of fur trapped heat remarkably well, adding comfort and warmth that wool and leather alone could not fully provide. Its presence in archaeological finds from colder regions suggests that the Romans were practical and adaptable when faced with demanding climates. In addition to leather and fur, soldiers used smaller textile accessories to reinforce warmth. Woolen scarves, foot wrappings, and hand coverings were common improvisations. These accessories were not always formally issued, but were often crafted by soldiers or acquired through trade with local populations. A strip of cloth wrapped around the head or hands made a notable difference in maintaining heat during winter nights. These small additions reflected the soldiers' ability to identify gaps in their protection and address them using simple but effective solutions. Boots also relied heavily on supplementary materials. Hobnail boots provided durability and grip, but were not naturally insulated. Soldiers addressed this by adding wool or fur inserts, or by crafting makeshift liners from scraps of cloth. These additions protected the feet from direct contact with cold leather and reduced the chill seeping upward from frozen ground. Foot protection was especially important, as numbness or frostbite could compromise a soldier's ability to march or stand guard. Even tent construction incorporated supplementary materials. Hide coverings reinforced leather panels, helping to block wind and keep the tent interior stable. In some regions, additional layers of local vegetation were added against tent walls for added insulation. These methods demonstrated the Roman talent for combining available materials to achieve the best possible protection. Together, fur and improvised textiles strengthened the Romans' winter defenses. Each material contributed a specific advantage, forming a flexible system that soldiers adapted to match their environment. Shield placement and wind-blocking. Roman soldiers relied on more than clothing and tents to protect themselves from winter winds. Their shields, essential tools in battle, also became practical instruments for survival during harsh nights. The thick, curved design of the scudum made it surprisingly effective at blocking wind and maintaining warmth inside the tent area. While shields were never intended as winter gear, the Romans' ability to adapt equipment to new purposes revealed their ingenuity and resourcefulness. When facing cold conditions without fire, every object that offered protection became part of an unwritten survival strategy. The scudum was large, often reaching from shoulder to knee, and built from layers of wood covered in leather. Its curved shape created a natural barrier that could redirect wind, rather than letting it pass through freely. Soldiers began placing their shields strategically around tent entrances and sleeping areas, especially on nights when gusts were strong. When angled properly, shields acted as windbreaks that softened the force of cold air. This extra layer of protection helped keep the tent interior slightly warmer, allowing soldiers to preserve body heat more effectively. Outside the tent, shields were positioned to block direct wind channels that formed between rows of tents. Cold air often moved most quickly through these narrow spaces. By placing shields in deliberate patterns, soldiers created small disruptions in airflow that slowed the wind's speed. These adjustments did not eliminate the cold, but they reduced the steady drafts that could make rest nearly impossible. The result was a microenvironment that, while still frigid, became far more manageable. Inside the tent, shields sometimes doubled as makeshift barriers between soldiers and tent walls. Leather tent panels could become stiff in the cold and were not entirely windproof. By leaning shields against the interior, soldiers added an extra layer of insulation. This simple tactic reduced the amount of cold air entering the sleeping area, especially near the ground where drafts were strongest. The shield structure also provided psychological comfort, giving soldiers the sense of being enclosed and protected, even when the night outside was unforgiving. Shields also contributed to ground insulation in creative ways. When the soil became too cold or uneven, soldiers occasionally positioned shields beneath bedding layers to raise themselves slightly above the frozen surface. This technique reduced heat transfer from their bodies into the ground. Although not commonly mentioned in historical texts, archaeological evidence and reenactment studies suggest that shields served multiple purposes beyond combat. These adaptations highlight the Roman soldiers' instinct for practicality. They understood that survival required flexibility and intelligent use of every tool at their disposal. A shield in their hands became more than a defensive weapon, it became an adaptable protection against winter's threats. Whether used outside the tent to block gusts or inside to reinforce insulation, the shield proved to be a reliable ally during nights when wind and cold threatened their rest. Repair tools and maintenance kits. Roman soldiers understood that winter survival depended not only on what equipment they possessed, but on how well it was maintained. A small tear in a cloak, a loosened strap, or a faulty tent seam could allow cold air or moisture to enter, making sleep far more difficult and dangerous. Because of this, soldiers carried basic repair tools as part of their personal kit. These items, though simple, played a crucial role in their nightly routines and their overall ability to withstand the harshness of winter without fire. Typical maintenance kits included needles, thread, awls, small knives, leather straps, and patches of cloth or hide. These tools allowed soldiers to mend garments quickly, reinforcing weak areas before they became serious problems. Wool cloaks, constantly exposed to friction and rough terrain, required regular attention. By repairing small holes early, soldiers prevented cold drafts from creeping in. The leather edges of cloaks and tunics, prone to cracking in winter air, were softened or reinforced with oils and stitching, extending their usefulness in freezing conditions. Tents also demanded constant care. Leather panels could stretch, warp, or weaken under winter stress. Soldiers inspected seams daily, especially in regions where snowfall accumulated on tent surfaces. A loose seam could let in drafts or allow water to drip into sleeping areas. Quick repairs ensured that the tent remained as protective as possible. Soldiers often worked together to reinforce tent panels, demonstrating the collective responsibility that defined life in the Cantabrium. Footwear required even more vigilance. Hobnail boots, though sturdy, were susceptible to wear from frozen ground and water exposure. Soldiers checked nails, replaced worn bindings, and stuffed extra wool into the interior for insulation. A well-maintained boot could keep a soldier mobile, while a neglected one could lead to cold injuries that threatened performance. Repairing footwear became part of the nightly routine, ensuring that soldiers did not wake with stiff, damp, or damaged boots that would make the next day's march unbearable. Even shields received attention. The leather covering on a scutum could crack or peel, allowing moisture to enter and weaken the wood beneath. Soldiers applied oils or waxes to protect the leather from winter damage. This maintenance not only preserved the shield for combat, but also kept it functional for wind blocking and insulation, as described earlier. Every piece of equipment was seen as part of a survival system that required care and readiness. Beyond the practical benefits, maintenance had a psychological effect. Repairing their gear gave soldiers a sense of control during winters where the environment felt overwhelmingly powerful. The act of stitching a cloak or securing a seam offered reassurance that they could influence their own comfort and safety. It reinforced discipline, routine, and self-reliance, qualities that shaped the Roman military identity. These simple tools and daily repairs helped soldiers preserve warmth, protect themselves from the elements, and extend the life of essential equipment. In winter, maintenance became a silent but critical ally, ensuring that every item served its purpose when needed most. Germania, the frozen edge of the Roman world. Germania stood as one of the most formidable frontiers the Roman army ever attempted to control. Unlike the temperate climates many recruits knew from Italy or the Mediterranean, Germania offered a world shaped by dense forests, unpredictable weather, and winters that seemed determined to break even the strongest soldiers. Snow fell thick and heavy, settling on armor, cloaks, and tents. The air carried a biting chill that seeped into bones, and the ground often froze solid for months at a time. Roman soldiers stationed here faced an environment that demanded constant vigilance, resilience, and adaptability. The forests alone presented challenges. Dark, sprawling woodlands muffled sound and blocked light, making visibility poor even during the day. In winter, the canopy grew quiet, absorbing the subtle noises of movement. When snow blanketed the forest floor, each step could betray a soldier's presence with a sharp crunch. For an army that valued precision and discipline, these unpredictable conditions made advancing or patrolling particularly difficult. Yet it was during the night, when soldiers sought rest, that Germania revealed its harshest side. Temperatures often plunged below freezing, and the cold became more than an inconvenience, it became a silent enemy. Without fire to warm themselves, soldiers relied entirely on wool garments, tents, and shared body heat. The cold seemed to press in from every direction, slipping through gaps in clothing and settling around exposed skin. When wind gusted through the trees, it carried icy drafts that made even the thickest cloaks feel insufficient. For many soldiers, nights in Germania were battles fought not against a visible foe, but against the relentless force of nature. The psychological strain of this frontier was equally intense. Germania's landscape felt foreign, vast, and intimidating. The dense forests created a sense of isolation, while the long winter nights amplified feelings of vulnerability. Soldiers knew that Germanic tribes were skilled fighters who could move silently through the terrain, appearing without warning. This combination of environmental hardship and constant threat kept soldiers alert, even when they attempted to sleep. Their attempts at rest were shaped by tension, as the quiet woods concealed dangers that could emerge at any moment. Despite these challenges, the Roman army adapted. Soldiers learned to use the terrain to their advantage, setting camp near natural windbreaks and clearing ground carefully to reduce dampness. They arranged tents tightly to conserve every bit of warmth. Even in the face of harsh winters, they applied the same disciplined routines that defined Roman military culture. Survival in Germania required a partnership between soldier and environment, where understanding the land became just as important as mastering weapons or formations. Germania's winters tested physical endurance, mental resilience, and group cohesion. The frontier's reputation for brutality was well earned, pushing soldiers to their limits. Yet it was also in this frozen landscape that Roman ingenuity and teamwork shone brightest, proving that survival was possible even under the most unforgiving winter skies. Summary: this section explores the harsh winter environment of Germania, highlighting its forests, freezing temperatures, psychological strain, and the disciplined adaptations Roman soldiers relied on to endure the frontier. Britannia. Damp, wet, and bone-chilling winter in Britannia challenged Roman soldiers in ways entirely different from the frozen forests of Germania. While temperatures were not always the lowest in the empire, the dampness was relentless. Rain fell often, sometimes as a mist, sometimes as a downpour, and the moisture clung to everything. Cloaks absorbed it, tents sagged beneath its weight, and the ground transformed into thick layers of mud. Britannia's cold crept in slowly, not always with the sharp bite of frost, but with a penetrating wetness that made even mild temperatures feel bitterly uncomfortable. This damp chill sank through clothing and lingered on the skin, draining warmth without mercy. The climate itself posed constant challenges. The air carried humidity that wrapped around the body like an unwelcome film, making wool feel heavier and less responsive. Even when soldiers shook the water from their cloaks, a persistent dampness remained. Over time, this saturation affected not only comfort, but also morale. Cold and wet conditions amplified fatigue, making every task feel more difficult. Unlike dry cold, which could sometimes be blocked by layers of wool, Britannia's moisture seemed to seep through any barrier, creating an ever-present battle against discomfort. The ground in Britannia added another layer of hardship. Rain turned soil into thick, slippery mud that clung to boots and slowed movement. Soldiers trudged through muck that sometimes rose past their ankles, increasing the effort required for marching or standing guard. Inside the camp, moisture pooled beneath tents, and soldiers had to be vigilant about insulating the ground to prevent their bedding from becoming damp. Sleeping on wet surfaces magnified the cold dramatically, so constant attention was needed to maintain usable sleeping spaces. Britannia's winds were another significant challenge. Blowing across open fields and rolling hills, they carried the damp cold farther and faster than still air. Even well-constructed leather tents struggled against these gusts, which found their way through seams and low openings. Soldiers learned to reinforce tent walls with shields, branches, or additional layers of cloth to keep the drafts at bay. Their survival strategies required constant adjustment, reflecting the unpredictable nature of Britannia's winter weather. Beyond physical discomfort, the psychological impact of constant wetness was considerable. Spending days and nights in damp clothing were heavily on the mind. The sensation of never being fully dry created a lingering irritation that tested patience and resilience. Soldiers missed the warmth of sunlight, the comfort of dry ground, and the simple relief of removing soaked garments. Their mental endurance became as important as their physical toughness, helping them stay focused on duty despite the incessant challenges. The Romans adapted as best they could. They took advantage of brief dry spells to air garments, arranged tents carefully to avoid pooling water, and used vegetation or straw to create dry layers beneath bedding. Their practical approach to Britannia's climate demonstrated their ability to respond to unique environments with discipline and ingenuity. Britannia's winter was not the coldest, but it was among the most miserable. The combination of moisture, wind, and unpredictable weather created a bone-deep chill that tested Roman endurance in its own distinct way. Summary: this section explores Britannia's wet, damp winter climate and explains how moisture, wind, mud, and persistent discomfort challenged Roman soldiers, requiring constant adaptation and resilience. The Alps, when cold becomes a physical barrier among all the regions the Roman army traversed, The Alps stood out as a place where cold transformed from an uncomfortable presence into a genuine obstacle. These towering mountains presented a world where snow could fall in blinding sheets, winds whipped through narrow passes with alarming force, and temperatures plunged so dramatically that even seasoned soldiers felt their strength tested. The Alps did not merely challenge Roman troops, they confronted them with a landscape that resisted passage at every step. For soldiers unfamiliar with such extremes, the mountains became a formidable adversary long before any human enemy appeared. Altitude played a major role in shaping the severity of alpine winters. As soldiers climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder. Breath became shorty, movement slowed, and fatigue increased rapidly. Snow-covered trails that were already difficult to navigate, transforming familiar routes into dangerous, shifting paths. Men marched carefully, placing each step with precision to avoid slipping on ice or sinking into drifts. The cold made metal brittle, stiffened leather straps, and numbed fingers, turning simple tasks into demanding challenges. Even experienced units found themselves adjusting constantly to the mountain's unforgiving rhythm. The wind posed an equally formidable threat. In the tight valleys and steep corridors of the Alps, winds funneled through with tremendous speed, cutting through layers of wool and leather. The gusts carried snow that struck like needles against exposed skin. At night, these winds became even more menacing. They pierced through tent seams, rattled equipment, and erased any lingering warmth soldiers worked to preserve. Roman engineers could prepare the ground and position tents strategically, but even their discipline could not fully tame alpine winds. Each night felt like a battle waged against invisible pressure that pushed relentlessly against their shelters. Snowfall compounded the difficulties. Heavy accumulation weighed down tents and required frequent clearing to prevent collapse. Soldiers often woke during the night to shake snow from leather roofs or reinforce tent poles. The effort kept them active, but also highlighted the constant vigilance demanded by the environment. When snow drifted inside the tent or melted beneath bedding, it created dampness that further threatened warmth. Winter in the Alps turned even rest into work, ensuring that comfort remained a fleeting luxury. Psychologically, the mountains imposed a feeling of isolation. The towering peaks enclosed the soldiers in a world of silence, broken only by wind or avalanche-like shifts of snow. The environment felt massive and impersonal, making even large Roman units seem small. Many soldiers experienced a sense of awe mixed with unease. Nature's sheer scale emphasized their vulnerability. Yet this same environment forged resilience. Overcoming alpine conditions fostered a shared determination that strengthened loyalty and discipline within the ranks. Despite these hardships, Roman soldiers adapted with their characteristic resourcefulness. They used extra layers, positioned shields as windbreaks, and relied heavily on teamwork. Every challenge met in the Alps became proof of their endurance. In this towering, frozen landscape, the Romans learned that survival demanded not just skill, but respect for the land itself. Psychological strain of frontier winters. Winter on Rome's distant frontiers tested far more than a soldier's physical endurance. The psychological strain of long, freezing nights in unfamiliar landscapes weighed heavily on the men who served there. Darkness stretched for extended hours, isolating soldiers in a world muted by snow and silent forests. The cold did not merely chill their bodies, it pressed on their minds, creating an atmosphere where discomfort, fear, and homesickness blended into a quiet but persistent burden. Understanding this emotional weight is essential to appreciating the full reality of winter on the fringes of the empire. One of the greatest challenges was the sense of isolation. Frontier regions like Germania, Britannia, and the Alpine passes felt vastly different from the bustling cities of the Mediterranean. In winter, the world became even quieter. Snow absorbed sound, making the environment eerily still. Tents offered shelter, but created a small, enclosed world where thoughts easily drifted toward home. Nights spent in close quarters could make even minor worries feel amplified, as the cold seemed to magnify every emotion. Soldiers relied heavily on one another to break this feeling of emotional solitude. The constant presence of danger added another layer of strain. Roman soldiers knew that enemies could exploit winter conditions to launch surprise attacks. The darkness and swirling snow created perfect cover for ambushes. Even when attacks were unlikely, the possibility lingered in the back of their minds. Night watches required vigilance, forcing soldiers to stay alert despite exhaustion and cold. This balance between fear and duty shaped the emotional landscape of winter nights, creating a steady tension that rarely fully dissipated. The environment also challenged morale. Prolonged exposure to cold made tempers short and patience thin. Clothing never felt completely dry, and boots often remained stiff with frost. Meals were simple and repetitive, and rest came in fragments. In these conditions, irritability could grow easily. Maintaining morale required leadership, camaraderie, and an unwavering commitment to routine. Soldiers found comfort in small rituals, sharing impressions of the day, adjusting bedding for one another, or exchanging remarks before sleep. These moments acted as anchors, grounding them in familiarity amid the harshness of the frontier. Homesickness intensified during winter. The cold nights stirred memories of warmth, family, and places far removed from the military camp. For many soldiers, especially those stationed far from their homeland, winter amplified feelings of distance. Letters traveled slowly, if at all, and news from home was rare. The emotional gap created by the separation could weigh heavily, making the cold feel sharper and the nights longer. Yet within this struggle, soldiers discovered resilience. They leaned on discipline, shared experiences, and the unspoken understanding that every man in the tent endured the same hardships. Through conversation, humor, or simple presence, they kept each other grounded. The psychological strain of winter did not break Roman soldiers, it reinforced their reliance on one another and strengthened the bonds that held the army together. Archaeological evidence from frontier camps understanding how Roman soldiers survived winter without fire becomes clearer when we examine the physical evidence left behind in ancient frontier camps. Archaeological sites such as Vindolanda in northern Britain, Carnuntum near the Danube, and various alpine passes have revealed remarkable artifacts that offer direct insight into the daily lives of soldiers enduring harsh climates. These discoveries bring the realities of winter survival into sharp focus, showing not only the challenges soldiers faced, but also the practical solutions they employed to stay warm. One of the most striking finds is the remarkable preservation of clothing, particularly woolen garments and footwear. At Vindolanda, for example, archaeologists unearthed wool socks, leather boots, and even fragments of cloaks that illustrate the layers soldiers relied on. Some socks were designed with separate compartments for toes, likely intended to fit comfortably inside hobnail boots while providing extra insulation. These items confirm that soldiers were actively managing cold conditions with thoughtful layering and protective materials. Tents and leather coverings also appear in the archaeological record. Fragments of tent panels, tent pegs, and repair materials reveal how soldiers maintained their shelters. Stitching patterns on surviving leather pieces show the care devoted to reinforcing seams, preventing drafts, and keeping tents functional in severe weather. These fragments align with historical accounts describing how soldiers prioritized tent maintenance to retain as much warmth as possible overnight. Evidence of bedding materials has also been discovered. Organic remains such as straw, reeds, and pine branches found in and around campsites suggest that soldiers used natural vegetation for ground insulation. These findings support the idea that soldiers regularly gathered whatever materials were available to create a protective layer between themselves and the frozen earth. Even small amounts of vegetation made a meaningful difference in comfort and warmth, reflecting a survival strategy confirmed both by artifacts and reenactment experiments. Tools and repair kits further illuminate winter routines. Archaeologists have recovered needles, awls, leather patches, and small blades, items that soldiers used to mend clothing and equipment. These simple tools highlight the necessity of constant maintenance. A tear in a cloak or a gap in a tent seam could be life-threatening in winter, and the presence of these tools demonstrates the soldiers' commitment to staying prepared. Perhaps most intriguing are the fire pits discovered outside camp boundaries. These are often located at a distance from the main sleeping areas, suggesting soldiers used fire sparingly and strategically. While fires were sometimes allowed during the day for cooking or warmth, their placement outside the living quarters confirms that nighttime flames were avoided to reduce visibility and minimize danger. Finally, writing tablets and personal notes found at frontier sites mention cold weather conditions, complaints about clothing, and requests for better equipment. These first-hand accounts humanize the archaeological record, revealing the everyday frustrations and challenges soldiers faced. Together, these artifacts create a vivid picture of winter survival. They confirm that Roman soldiers used layered wool, insulated bedding, well-maintained tents, and strategic routines to endure freezing nights without fire. Written accounts by ancient historians long before archaeologists unearthed physical evidence. Ancient historians documented the struggles Roman soldiers faced during winter campaigns. Their writings offer vivid, personal perspectives that bring the realities of cold, discomfort, and hardship to life. Although each historian wrote with their own style, their accounts consistently reveal how deeply winter shaped the Roman military experience. These texts, preserved through centuries, allow modern readers to understand the emotional and physical weight carried by soldiers who endured brutal conditions across the empire's coldest frontiers. Tacitus, known for his detailed observations of life in northern provinces, often described the harsh climates that Roman soldiers encountered in Germania. He wrote of dense forests, long winters, and the relentless cold that challenged even the most disciplined troops. His descriptions highlight how winter amplified danger, reducing visibility and making movements slower and riskier. Tacitus emphasized that Roman soldiers fought not only human enemies, but also the unforgiving environment, which demanded constant endurance. Julius Caesar, in his commentaries, mentioned winter conditions indirectly while describing his campaigns in Gaul. He noted how snow and cold influenced supply routes, movement of troops, and the morale of his men. Caesar's writings reveal that winter wasn't merely a backdrop, it shaped his strategic decisions. While he often portrayed his soldiers as tough and adaptable, the underlying message is clear. Winter placed severe pressure on logistics and required careful planning to prevent exhaustion and exposure. Vegetius, writing later in Roman history, provided insight into the army's expectations regarding discipline and training. Although not focused solely on climate, he emphasized the importance of soldiers preparing for all conditions, including extreme cold. His recommendations for gear, clothing, and routines reflect a broader institutional understanding of how dangerous winter could be. Vegetius' writings show that by his time, the Roman military had formalized many of the survival strategies soldiers learned through experience. Cassius Dio offered another perspective, describing the emotional and psychological effects of winter on soldiers stationed far from home. In his accounts, long nights, freezing temperatures, and persistent dampness often led to lowered morale. He recorded complaints, hardships, and the strain placed on units positioned in remote territories. These descriptions remind us that Roman troops were human men who felt the cold keenly and struggled to endure it, even when discipline demanded perseverance. Smaller fragments of writing also contribute to our understanding. Letters from soldiers stationed at places like Vindolanda mention freezing conditions, requests for warmer clothing, and frustrations with the weather. These personal notes, often brief but honest, give voice to individuals facing winter's challenges day after day. Their simplicity makes them powerful, grounding the historical narrative in direct human experience. Collectively, the writings of ancient historians and soldiers create a compelling picture of winter in the Roman world. They confirm that cold was a formidable adversary, influencing strategy, morale, and daily life. These texts deepen our appreciation for the resilience soldiers displayed as they faced the cold, without the comfort of fire. Modern experimental archaeology has become one of the most valuable tools for understanding how Roman soldiers actually survived harsh winter conditions. By recreating the clothing, equipment, and routines of Roman military life, researchers and reenactors can test theories about warmth, insulation, and endurance in real environments. These experiments provide practical insights that complement written accounts and archaeological finds, offering a deeper, more human understanding of what winter survival truly required. Reenactors often begin by wearing accurate reproductions of Roman clothing: wool tunics, cloaks, sandals, hobnail boots, and leather gear. Through real-world use, they discover how these garments function under cold, windy, and damp conditions. Wool, for example, confirms its reputation as a resilient insulator. Experiments show that even lightweight tunics provide significant warmth when combined with the sorghum cloak. Participants note that wool retains heat even when damp, aligning perfectly with archaeological evidence and historical descriptions. These first-hand experiences reinforce the idea that Roman soldiers relied heavily on their layered garments to endure winter nights. Tent reconstructions offer another valuable perspective. Replicas of leather Roman tents, assembled according to excavation data, reveal how effective the original designs were at retaining warmth. When multiple reenactors sleep together in a tent, the internal temperature consistently rises above the outside temperature, often by several degrees. Although the space never becomes truly warm, these small increases make a noticeable difference in comfort. Modern participants quickly learn that close sleeping arrangements, low ceilings, and minimal ventilation mimic the natural microclimate that Roman soldiers depended on. Each night, experiments also test the insulating properties of natural ground cover. When reenactors place straw, branches, or pine needles beneath their bedding, they experience significantly reduced heat loss. These findings match archaeological discoveries of organic materials found beneath ancient campsites. The results highlight how simple, readily available vegetation could mean the difference between a manageable night and a dangerously cold one. Footwear trials reveal both strengths and weaknesses. Authentic hobnail boots offer durability but limited insulation. Reenactors often report cold feet unless they wrap them with extra wool, just as Roman soldiers likely did. This practice confirms that footwear required modification for winter conditions, an insight supported by the discovery of wool socks and textile strips at frontier sites. Night watch rotations are also tested. Through first-hand experience, reenactors learn how rising periodically to stand guard can help maintain body temperature. Even minimal movement during these shifts generates enough warmth to offset the cold that builds during sleep. Participants often describe feeling more alert and physically ready after rotating watches than after sleeping undisturbed in the cold, supporting the theory that Roman watch cycles unintentionally aided winter survival. These experiments demonstrate that while Roman soldiers endured significant hardships, their methods were practical and effective. The combination of wool clothing, tent design, insulation techniques, and shared routines formed a reliable system that modern trials consistently validate. Comparing Roman survival to other ancient armies, Roman soldiers were not the only warriors who faced brutal winters, but their survival methods reflected a unique blend of discipline, adaptability, and practical engineering. Comparing their techniques to those of other ancient cultures highlights both the strengths and the limitations of the Roman approach. Each society developed its own strategies for dealing with harsh climates, shaped by geography, resources, and lifestyle. By observing these differences, we gain a deeper appreciation for how the Roman army endured winter without relying on fire at night. Greek hoplites, for example, were accustomed to different conditions. Campaigning seasons in the Greek world generally avoided the coldest months, and their heavily armored fighting style was not designed for prolonged winter exposure. Greek soldiers often relied on shorter campaigns and more temperate climates, reducing the need for extensive cold weather survival techniques. When forced into winter conditions, they struggled, lacking some of the adaptive layering and tent systems the Romans used. This contrast underscores how the Roman army's year-round campaign mindset required more developed winter strategies. Celtic and Germanic tribes, on the other hand, displayed remarkable resilience in cold environments. Their survival was tied closely to the land, and they often used furs, animal hides, and thick wool garments to protect themselves from the elements. Unlike the Romans, who favored uniform equipment, these tribes relied on diverse clothing assembled from local resources, giving them excellent insulation. Their shelters, huts, longhouses, or semi-underground dwellings were sturdier and warmer than Roman tents. However, these structures were stationary, while Roman camps needed to be rebuilt daily. This difference highlights the Romans' challenge: maintaining mobility without sacrificing survival. Steppe nomads such as the Scythians, Sarmatians, and later the Huns also offer an interesting comparison. These groups mastered survival in freezing plains, relying on fur-lined clothing and portable felt tents that provided superior insulation. Their diet, rich in fats and proteins, generated significant body heat. Like the Romans, they relied on shared warmth, but their shelters were far more effective at trapping heat. While the Romans excelled in engineering, steppe nomads benefited from traditions shaped by centuries of living in extreme cold. Their tents, often made from layers of felt, surpassed Roman leather tents in warmth and wind resistance. Despite these comparisons, the Romans stood out in one critical way: their adaptability. Facing climates that ranged from Mediterranean coasts to northern forests and icy mountain passes, they modified their equipment and routines rather than relying on a single cultural tradition. Their survival strategies combined elements of discipline, engineering, and improvisation, allowing them to endure winter in places far removed from their origins. Where other cultures depended on familiar environments, the Roman army had to adjust constantly as it expanded across new territories. These comparisons reveal that Roman winter survival was neither the most advanced nor the most comfortable, but it was remarkably effective. Their methods reflected a balance between practicality and mobility, enabling them to maintain military presence across a vast and diverse empire. Frostbite, illness, and winter casualties. Cold in the Roman frontier was more than a discomfort. It was a true adversary capable of injuring or killing even the most disciplined soldiers. Winter campaigns exposed troops to conditions that pushed their bodies beyond safe limits. Frostbite, respiratory illness, and general cold-related exhaustion were persistent threats. While Roman soldiers were resilient, they were still human, and winter was often their most unforgiving enemy. Understanding the physical consequences of extreme cold reveals how narrow the line was between survival and serious harm. Frostbite was one of the most immediate dangers. Soldiers who stood guard for long periods or marched through icy terrain risked losing feeling in their extremities. Noses, ears, fingers, and toes were especially vulnerable. Without fire to warm themselves at night, these areas could stiffen, ache, or become numb within minutes. Frostbite was not always recorded explicitly in Roman texts, but descriptions of soldiers suffering from blackened skin, loss of sensation, or difficulty moving limbs strongly suggest it occurred frequently. Even mild frostbite weakened a soldier's ability to grip weapons or maintain balance, undermining combat readiness. Respiratory illnesses were another major concern. Weeks of breathing frigid air, combined with constant exposure to moisture, made soldiers prone to coughing fits, chest congestion, and fevers. Hypothermia was particularly dangerous. A soldier who fell asleep too exposed to the cold might wake shivering uncontrollably or, in severe cases, struggle to wake at all. Without modern medical knowledge, the Romans relied on rest, warmth from clothing, and basic remedies to treat these conditions. In many cases, recovery depended largely on the soldier's own strength and the support of his contubernum. The damp climates of Britannia and similar regions contributed to persistent chills and lingering weakness. Clothing that never fully dried increased the likelihood of respiratory infections. Soldiers might endure days or weeks of low-grade illness, feeling drained while still performing physically demanding tasks. Winter fatigue wore them down gradually, making them more susceptible to more serious conditions. Even a minor illness could rapidly worsen under harsh weather, turning routine discomfort into a dangerous threat. Long marches in winter added another layer of risk. Cold muscles were more prone to strain, and icy terrain increased the chance of falls. Slipping into icy water or tripping over snow-covered obstacles could leave a soldier soaked or injured, drastically increasing the danger of hypothermia. Since Roman units depended on collective strength, one sick or injured soldier placed additional strain on his tentmates, who had to help carry gear or adjust duties to compensate. Despite these dangers, Roman soldiers rarely complained openly. Discipline demanded endurance, and their training emphasized perseverance through hardship. But winter casualties were real. The toll was often hidden not through dramatic deaths, but through slow decline, a soldier weakened by illness, another limping from frostbitten toes, another coughing through the night. Winter quietly eroded the ranks, testing the resilience of even the strongest units. Retreats, repositioning, and emergency measures. Winter conditions could become so severe on the Roman frontiers that even the best prepared soldiers in camps reached their limits. When temperatures dropped dangerously low or storms threatened the stability of the camp, Roman commanders were forced to take decisive action. These measures were not taken lightly. A retreat or relocation required careful coordination, especially when visibility was limited and the environment itself had become hostile. Yet winter sometimes demanded flexibility over pride. Recognizing when conditions had become unsustainable was a crucial part of military leadership. One of the most common emergency responses was repositioning the camp to a more sheltered location. If strong winds battered the tents or snow piled too heavily against the ramparts, commanders might order the entire unit to relocate to higher ground, denser woodland, or the lee side of a hill. These natural windbreaks could drastically improve conditions, reducing exposure and helping soldiers conserve precious body heat. Even a short move could mean the difference between manageable discomfort and life-threatening cold. In extreme cases, Roman soldiers built additional barriers to reinforce their camp. Shields, stakes, and even bundles of brushwood were arranged to block drafts and create improvised walls. These makeshift structures were quick to assemble and provided essential relief during sudden winter gusts. Sometimes soldiers dug shallow trenches inside the camp to direct melting snow away from sleeping areas. This prevented water from seeping into tents and soaked bedding. Quick action in these moments preserved warmth, protected equipment, and minimized illness. Winter storms occasionally forced units into temporary shelters outside their usual tent arrangements. Soldiers might gather inside sturdier wooden structures, abandoned buildings, or hastily constructed lean-tos if the weather became too extreme. These emergency shelters were not luxurious, but they offered a respite from the worst of the cold. Soldiers would crowd together, relying heavily on shared body heat until conditions improved. Such measures highlight the adaptability of Roman troops in unpredictable climates. Supply lines also influenced emergency decisions. Severe winter storms could cut off access to food or fresh clothing. Commanders monitored conditions carefully, knowing that an isolated camp could face starvation or exposure if resupply was delayed too long. When necessary, units retreated temporarily to supply posts or winter quarters to regroup and restore their strength. These retreats were tactical rather than symbolic. They demonstrated the army's focus on long-term survival over stubborn resistance. Despite the psychological strain of appearing to withdraw, such decisions rarely damaged morale. Soldiers understood that winter demanded respect. Every man in the camp felt the cold, and every man knew how quickly conditions could turn deadly. Emergency measures were viewed not as signs of weakness, but as practical strategies for enduring forces beyond human control. The Romans' ability to adapt quickly to winter's challenges helped them maintain readiness even when nature resisted their presence. These tactical responses reveal that winter survival required more than routine discipline. It demanded quick thinking, organized movement, and the willingness to reshape strategies based on the environment. Winter mutinies and morale breakdowns. Winter on the Roman frontiers did more than strain the body, it tested the spirit. Extreme cold, sleepless nights, limited supplies, and constant discomfort created an environment where morale could falter. Although the Roman army was famous for its discipline, even the most rigid structure couldn't completely shield soldiers from emotional breaking points. In rare but revealing moments, winter conditions contributed to unrest, complaints, and even mutiny. These instances shed light on the psychological limits of Roman endurance and the pressures soldiers faced when nature became as threatening as any enemy. One of the most significant factors in winter-related unrest was the feeling of helplessness. Soldiers trained to fight human foes found it harder to battle the cold, which could not be defeated through force or tactics. When storms raged, or when icy winds tore through camp walls, soldiers were reminded of their vulnerability. Repeated exposure wore down patience and energy. Grievances that seemed minor in warmer seasons, stiff boots, poor quality cloaks, reduced rations, became magnified under winter's harshness. Communication breakdowns added to the problem. Harsh weather often disrupted supply lines, delaying the arrival of food, clothing, and pay. Soldiers waiting for relief sometimes believed they had been forgotten or neglected by distant commanders. Rumors spread quickly in these conditions, fueled by frustration and exhaustion. When men felt unsupported, their trust in leadership weakened. This erosion of confidence occasionally escalated to open protest. Historical records include moments where winter directly contributed to mutiny. Cassius Dio and Tacitus described troops refusing orders, criticizing leadership, or demanding better conditions. In one notable incident along the Rhine, soldiers stationed in freezing conditions complained bitterly about the lack of adequate clothing and prolonged service. The cold intensified their feelings of injustice, making discipline harder to maintain. While these events were not common, their occurrence underscores how winter amplified tensions that already existed within the ranks. Morale breakdowns also occurred at the smaller scale of daily life. Within tents, soldiers sometimes quarreled under the pressure of constant cold. Fatigue shortened tempers, hunger sharpened frustration. Even camaraderie, usually a source of strength, could falter when conditions grew too harsh. The stress of winter created emotional friction that officers had to address quickly to prevent larger issues. Leaders played a critical role in stabilizing morale. Centurions and experienced commanders recognized the signs of strain and responded with stricter routines, shared hardship, or promises of relief once conditions improved. Even simple acts, such as distributing extra clothing or organizing improved shelter arrangements, helped restore confidence. The Roman emphasis on discipline did not mean ignoring suffering. It meant acknowledging it and guiding soldiers through it. Though rare, winter mutinies remind us that Roman soldiers were not unbreakable. They were resilient, but they had limits. Cold weather exposed those limits and revealed the emotional cost of serving in distant, dangerous lands. These moments of unrest show that winter was more than a physical challenge, it was a force capable of shaking the foundations of even the strongest armies. Roman winter training and preparation. The Roman army's success was built on meticulous preparation, and winter survival was no exception. Although Roman soldiers did not undergo explicit winter training in the way modern military units might, their overall training ensured they could handle the harshest of climates. Roman soldiers were taught to adapt every challenge, and this mindset proved essential in enduring winters on the empire's farthest borders. Their training focused on endurance, discipline, and the skills necessary to survive under extreme conditions, skills that were put to the test when the cold came. From the very beginning of their service, Roman recruits were hardened through rigorous physical training. The famous Viae Militares, long marches carrying full packs, were not just about speed or combat readiness, but about building the strength and stamina necessary to withstand the fatigue of harsh environments. These marches often took place in challenging conditions, with soldiers exposed to sun, rain, or early signs of cold. As recruits became accustomed to working through discomfort, they unknowingly prepared themselves for the greater challenges of winter. Their bodies were conditioned to endure long hours of physical strain, allowing them to manage the cold with greater ease than those without similar training. Roman soldiers also honed skills that were invaluable during winter months. They were trained in setting up camps quickly and efficiently, often in locations where natural resources were scarce and the cold was most biting. Tents, for example, were assembled with expertise. Soldiers could build strong, weather-resistant shelters that would last through snowstorms and freezing winds. They understood the importance of camp layout, how to place tents in a way that maximized wind protection and minimized exposure to the elements. When a storm hit, they knew how to secure their shelters and adapt quickly, using available materials like shields and stakes to fortify their tents against the wind. Beyond shelter, Roman training emphasized resourcefulness in maintaining clothing and equipment. Soldiers were taught how to repair their cloaks, boots, and armor using the basic tools they carried with them. This constant upkeep allowed them to keep their gear in working order, preventing failures that could lead to exposure. Each man was also trained in layering techniques, ensuring that clothing could be adjusted to different temperatures. Wool tunics were worn beneath leather armor, and cloaks were tightly wrapped during rest periods. These methods ensured that soldiers stayed warmer longer even when conditions worsened. Mental fortitude was just as important as physical training. Roman soldiers were taught to endure discomfort without complaint. The discipline instilled in them turned the cold into a challenge to overcome, not an excuse to falter. This mentality helped them push through long, sleepless nights and cold mornings without losing their focus. Leadership during these times was crucial, and Roman officers knew how to keep their men motivated, ensuring that their morale remained intact even as temperatures dropped. Training did not guarantee comfort during winter, but it prepared Roman soldiers to face the cold with confidence, ingenuity, and perseverance. Their training turned survival into a learned skill, one that became second nature in the harshest environments. Roman military logistics and winter supply chains logistics were the backbone of the Roman Empire's military power, and their ability to sustain soldiers during the harsh winter months relied heavily on well-established supply chains. However, these supply lines often faced significant challenges during the winter, especially in regions where weather and terrain posed serious obstacles. Roman commanders had to ensure that supplies, food, clothing, firewood, and medical supplies were consistently delivered despite snow, ice, and storms. The Roman military's logistical systems were a triumph of organization, but winter tested them in ways that required innovation and constant adaptation. The primary logistical challenge during winter was ensuring that troops were properly supplied with food. Roman soldiers were not just fed, they were sustained through a carefully managed system that guaranteed a consistent supply of rations. Grains, salted meat, and dried vegetables made up the bulk of their diet, while wine and water were essential for hydration. During winter, however, the process of transporting these supplies became far more difficult. Snow, mud, and freezing temperatures slowed movement, often making traditional routes impassable. Roads built by the Romans, though durable, still needed constant maintenance, and snowdrifts could block even the most well-constructed paths. Roman commanders were keenly aware of these difficulties and planned accordingly. They often established secondary supply routes, including local resources such as grain mills and storage depots, to keep their troops stocked. In cases where the roads were impassable, they would use local markets to supplement the soldiers' rations. This decentralized approach allowed for a steady flow of provisions even when main supply lines were compromised. It also meant that soldiers had to be self-sufficient to a degree, foraging when possible, or making use of nearby towns and villages for resupply. Beyond food, clothing was a critical logistical consideration. The cold conditions placed extreme pressure on the army's clothing supplies. Roman soldiers had to ensure they had adequate layers for warmth, with wool cloaks and tunics forming the base. To deal with the depletion of essential garments, military depots would maintain large stores of cloth, leather, and wool. These depots were stocked in advance, and soldiers were expected to repair and replace their gear as necessary, often in the middle of winter. This practice of constant clothing maintenance required a well-organized supply chain that could respond to the wear and tear caused by freezing temperatures, rain, and snow. Firewood was another essential but often scarce resource during the winter months. Roman soldiers relied on small cooking fires for warmth and food preparation, but finding and transporting firewood in cold, snow-covered forests or along frozen riverbanks was no simple task. Some camps built wood stores along critical routes to ensure firewood was always available. In some cases, soldiers were tasked with cutting and gathering wood during the warmer months to stockpile it in preparation for the coming cold. Roman military logistics were a finely tuned operation, but during winter, the system faced unique challenges that required ingenuity, planning, and flexibility. While their enemies might be hindered by the cold, The Romans were able to maintain their fighting capabilities by keeping their supply chains intact, no small feat in a world where winter was a constant adversary. Roman fortifications and winter defense strategies. Roman military strategy was not limited to battles alone and extended to the construction of defensive positions that could withstand the harshest conditions, including winter. Winter, in particular, presented unique challenges for defending outposts, forts, and military camps on the empire's frontiers. Roman soldiers were not only skilled in offensive tactics, but also in fortifying their camps to endure extreme weather, prevent infiltration, and protect against surprise attacks during the long, cold nights. The strategic value of these fortifications lay not only in their design, but in their ability to provide warmth, security, and stability to soldiers facing relentless cold. The most common winter fortifications included defensive walls, ditches, and earthen ramparts. These structures were typically constructed before winter's arrival, designed to prevent enemy forces from gaining access to the camp, even during adverse weather. The walls were often made of wood, stone, or a combination of both, depending on the region. The thick earthen ramparts, or agger, helped protect against both enemy assault and the elements. These fortifications served as a barrier against the wind, helping to shield soldiers from the biting cold that would otherwise penetrate tents and sleeping areas. In addition to the fortifications themselves, Roman military camps were often built with careful attention to the natural environment. Romans were skilled engineers, and their understanding of terrain allowed them to select the most defensible locations for their camps. On the frontiers, forts were often built on elevated ground to provide a strategic advantage against potential attacks. In places like Britannia, where fog and rain were frequent, Roman commanders selected high ground that allowed for clear visibility of surrounding areas, which also offered some degree of protection from flooding and extreme temperatures. The high position of a fort would also allow soldiers to spot any approaching threats, such as hostile tribes, in time to respond appropriately. Inside these fortified walls, soldiers adapted their sleeping arrangements to better deal with the cold. The defensive structures provided a layer of protection from harsh winds, but soldiers were still vulnerable to freezing temperatures, especially at night. Thus, their tents were positioned to maximize warmth by sheltering them behind protective barriers. Soldiers slept close to one another, not just for comfort, but for warmth. The shared body heat of multiple soldiers in tight quarters created a warmer microclimate within the camp, making it more bearable during sub-zero nights. In the case of more permanent fortifications, such as castra or castella, these were built with a more sophisticated approach. Permanent stone walls and structures ensured better protection against both the environment and any would-be attackers. These forts had internal heating systems that helped maintain some level of warmth, though they were primitive by today's standards. Roman military engineers also designed these structures with thick, insulated walls to trap heat inside and block the cold. Roman fortifications were not only practical, they symbolized the power of the empire. They communicated to both the soldiers and local populations that Rome's presence was unyielding, even in the most inhospitable climates. Winter defenses were critical to maintaining the empire's military readiness, ensuring that Roman soldiers could endure harsh conditions while also remaining prepared for any surprise attacks. Adaptations to local environments. Roman flexibility. One of the greatest strengths of the Roman military was its ability to adapt to local environments, a necessity when facing the severe winters of various frontier regions. Whether stationed in the freezing forests of Germania, the damp lands of Britannia, or the mountainous passes of the Alps, Roman soldiers displayed a remarkable flexibility in tailoring their survival strategies to their surroundings. This ability to adjust and modify standard Roman practices for specific climates allowed the army to maintain operational readiness throughout the year, despite the numerous challenges posed by each environment. In regions where winter brought heavy snow and bitter winds, like Germania, the Roman military took advantage of natural formations to shield themselves. Camps were often placed in the lee of hills or dense woodlands, where the terrain naturally provided protection from the harshest winds. Roman soldiers also used local materials to reinforce their shelters. The use of timber, bark, and other forest resources allowed soldiers to build stronger, more insulated tents and windbreaks. These adjustments reflected Roman ingenuity, as soldiers utilized whatever they could find in their immediate environment to make life more bearable. The flexibility of Roman winter strategies was most evident in their clothing adaptations. In regions like Britannia, where the climate was often damp and muddy, the Romans adjusted their standard tunics by layering them with furs or thick leather. These were not common Roman items, but the military's ability to incorporate local goods and practices was essential for survival. Furs, for example, were a natural insulation against wet, penetrating cold, and the Romans quickly learned how to use them effectively to supplement their existing woolen clothing. In places where wool alone could not fend off the chill, they improvised, utilizing local pelts, animal skins, and even felt to create extra layers of warmth. When stationed in mountainous regions like the Alps, Roman soldiers had to contend with the extreme cold at higher elevations. In such areas, the Romans employed additional measures, such as reinforcing their tents with thicker hides and adding extra layers of insulation in their bedding. Soldiers would also wear additional cloaks or thicker tunics to retain warmth while performing tasks in the freezing conditions. In some instances, soldiers stationed in such harsh environments were also given specialized training in mountain warfare, preparing them to navigate steep, snow-covered terrain and respond to environmental challenges that could not be addressed through traditional military tactics. Roman military leaders also took into account the local populations when it came to adapting to winter conditions. In areas with local tribes, the Romans would often trade for goods like extra clothing, firewood, or food supplies, further integrating themselves into the local economy. This flexibility, born of necessity, allowed Roman troops to maintain their health and effectiveness even in the most unforgiving climates. The ability to incorporate local resources and methods into Roman military strategy not only ensured survival, but also helped cement Rome's dominance over vast, diverse territories. The Roman ability to adapt was a key factor in their military success. Rather than relying solely on rigid and changing strategies, they showed a remarkable capacity to modify their practices to suit the environment. This adaptability ensured that the empire could maintain a strong, effective military presence even in the harshest of winters. The role of Roman commanders in winter survival. While individual Roman soldiers were trained to endure the harshest winter conditions, the role of their commanders was crucial in ensuring the army's survival during extreme weather. Roman military leadership was not just about directing soldiers in battle. It also involved maintaining morale, managing resources, and making strategic decisions to adapt to changing environmental conditions. In the brutal winter months, commanders became not just military leaders, but also crucial figures in guiding their troops through the most challenging and dangerous seasons of the year. The first responsibility of Roman commanders during the winter was to ensure that their soldiers were properly supplied. While soldiers were trained to be self-sufficient, commanders had to oversee the logistics of supply chains, ensuring that food, clothing, firewood, and medical supplies were delivered even in the most difficult conditions. The army's vast network of supply depots and secondary routes were integral to maintaining a steady flow of resources. Commanders had to constantly assess the situation, making decisions about the best routes for resupply and whether alternative local sources could be tapped when regular supply lines were disrupted by snow or blocked roads. In addition to ensuring material support, commanders had to oversee the construction and maintenance of camps and fortifications. The design and location of a camp were key to winter survival. Roman commanders relied on their knowledge of local geography to select the most sheltered locations, often near hills or forests that provided natural windbreaks. Inside the camp, leaders supervised the construction of defensive structures, ensuring that barriers, ditches, and tents were properly secured against the cold. A well-maintained camp was not just a place of rest, but a sanctuary where soldiers could find relative warmth and protection from the elements. Commanders also played a central role in managing the mental and emotional well-being of their troops. Winter conditions could bring a sense of isolation, fatigue, and frustration, and it was the responsibility of commanders to keep morale high. They did this through a combination of shared hardship, personal leadership, and clear communication. A commander who led by example, braving the cold alongside his men, strengthened the bond between leader and soldier. Commanders often used encouragement, discipline, and rewards to keep soldiers focused on the task at hand, reminding them that survival was not just about enduring the cold, but about maintaining readiness for battle, even in the harshest conditions. During long, cold nights, when soldiers stood guard in freezing temperatures or huddled in their tents, the commander's decisions on watch rotations, rest periods, and rationing could make the difference between a successful winter campaign and a breakdown in morale. Commanders understood that the key to surviving winter was not just resisting the cold, but managing the collective strength of the army. This strategic leadership helped Roman forces endure winters in places like Germania, Britannia, and the Alps, where the environment seemed to offer nothing but opposition. Finally, when circumstances required it, Roman commanders made the difficult decision to retreat or reposition the army. Whether due to the severity of winter storms, difficult terrain, or the exhaustion of their men, these decisions were made with the well-being of the army in mind. While retreat was often seen as a last resort, Roman commanders knew that sometimes the best course of action was to regroup and fight another day. This ability to make tough calls in the face of extreme conditions is one of the reasons Roman military leaders were so effective. The Roman legion's resilience in winter. The Roman legion, as a military unit, was defined by its resilience. While the empire's armies were famed for their ability to conquer vast territories, it was their capacity to endure the harshest of conditions that allowed them to maintain such an extensive presence across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Winter was perhaps the greatest test of this resilience. In frontier regions such as Germania, Britannia, and the Alps, soldiers had to face brutal cold, isolation, and exhaustion without the comfort of fire or constant warmth. Yet, it was in these coldest months that the full strength of the Roman legion was most evident. Roman legions were not simply groups of soldiers. They were highly organized units with a profound sense of duty and shared purpose. This structure became particularly important during winter, when physical and psychological endurance were as vital as combat skill. The legion was built on discipline, and this discipline was key to survival during the winter months. Soldiers relied on routine, rigid, reliable schedules that dictated not only their military training but their daily lives. In winter, this routine became even more critical, helping soldiers push through long, cold nights and exhausting days. One of the legion's most notable qualities was its ability to work together as a cohesive force. In extreme conditions, the strength of the legion came from its shared experiences and collective responsibility. Roman soldiers did not face the cold alone. They faced it together. The tightly knit structure of the legion allowed for mutual support. Soldiers kept an eye on one another, helping with the maintenance of clothing, tents, and personal gear. During the coldest nights, soldiers often huddled together for warmth, creating a collective shield against the elements. This solidarity was not merely a physical necessity, but a key component of Roman military culture. Training was a critical aspect of the legion's ability to endure winter hardships. Roman soldiers were prepared for a variety of climates and conditions, but winter training was essential to ensure that they could function at full capacity in the harshest environments. Through rigorous drills, soldiers learned how to march for long hours in snow, build protective camps, and make use of the limited resources at hand. This training instilled not only physical strength but mental fortitude, helping soldiers to persist through the extreme cold without faltering. It was this combination of physical and mental preparation that made the legion so formidable. Roman military engineers played an equally important role in ensuring the survival of the legion during winter. They designed and built fortifications, shelters, and defensive positions that minimized exposure to the elements. The use of local materials, from wood to stone, allowed the legions to construct effective defenses that provided warmth and protection against the freezing cold. Even when caught in more severe winter conditions, Roman engineers were able to adapt quickly, constructing structures that could withstand the harshest climates. Ultimately, the resilience of the Roman legion in winter was rooted in its collective strength, discipline, and adaptability. Facing freezing temperatures, biting winds, and the constant threat of illness or injury, Roman soldiers endured, not because they were immune to hardship, but because their training, unity, and determination made them capable of overcoming it. Winter did not break the Roman legions, it revealed their true strength. Survival beyond the legion. Auxiliary forces in winter. While the Roman legions were the backbone of the empire's military might, the auxiliary forces played an equally vital role, especially during the brutal winters on the empire's frontiers. These troops, made up of non-citizen soldiers from various regions, had their own unique strengths and skills, often shaped by the environments in which they lived before joining the Roman army. During the winter months, the auxiliaries adapted to the harsh conditions in ways that complemented and supported the legion, proving that survival in the cold was a collective effort that required the strength and versatility of the entire military. Auxiliary forces, including archers, cavalry, and light infantry, were often stationed in regions where the legions needed additional support. These troops came from different cultures with varying approaches to winter survival. For example, auxiliaries from the colder northern regions, such as Germanic tribes or the Sarmatians from the steppe, were accustomed to severe winters. These soldiers brought with them local knowledge and specialized equipment, including fur-lined clothing and boots, which were crucial in enduring the long, bitter cold. Their experience with cold weather made them highly valuable in regions like Germania or the northern parts of Britannia, where the Roman legions would otherwise struggle with the extreme conditions. The role of cavalry auxiliaries in winter was particularly significant. Though their primary role was reconnaissance and rapid movement, during the winter, they were tasked with patrolling long stretches of frontier to keep an eye on local tribes and detect any potential threats. Their horses, though more resilient to cold than the soldiers, still required specialized care to prevent frostbite or fatigue. Cavalry auxiliaries had to use their mobility to their advantage, establishing advanced camps or even scouting routes for supply convoys during snowstorms. While they were not as insulated as the infantry, their role in securing the periphery of Roman territories was vital, especially in the unpredictable winter months when visibility was often reduced by snow and fog. Archers and light infantry, drawn from regions with diverse climates, played crucial support roles. Many of these auxiliaries had been trained in areas where winter conditions were harsh, equipping them with a unique understanding of survival tactics in cold climates. For example, archers from the eastern provinces were adept at using terrain to their advantage, constructing shelters with local materials to minimize exposure to the cold. They worked closely with legionaries to ensure that the defensive lines and fortifications held strong against both external threats and the elements. While the legions formed the core of the Roman military machine, the auxiliaries provided essential versatility. Their diverse experiences allowed them to bring different survival skills and innovations to the table, contributing to the overall effectiveness of Roman military operations in winter. Whether through the provision of specialized clothing, local knowledge of terrain, or added defense capabilities, auxiliary forces helped the Roman army endure the harshest winters and maintain control over vast and hostile territories. Ultimately, the auxiliaries were not mere supplements to the legions, they were critical to the survival and success of Roman military campaigns during winter. Their adaptability, specialized skills, and resilience in the face of cold weather made them indispensable in the empire's effort to hold its farthest reaches against both natural and human threats. Roman tactics in winter combat. Adapting to the cold winter combat on the Roman frontier acquired adaptations beyond mere survival tactics. While soldiers faced tremendous challenges in enduring the cold, the Roman military's tactical brilliance allowed them to remain effective in battle, even when temperatures plummeted and snowstorms obscured vision. In regions where warfare continued throughout the year, including the bitter winters of Germania and the Alps, Roman commanders relied on strategic ingenuity to overcome both the elements and their enemies. One of the most notable adaptations to winter combat was the use of terrain. Roman commanders recognized that the winter landscape, though harsh, could provide significant advantages if leveraged correctly. The Romans, known for their engineering expertise, built fortifications and camps with a focus on defending against both human and natural threats. However, in battle, they also adapted their approach to the terrain. Frozen rivers, snow-covered forests, and mountain passes created opportunities to use the land itself as a weapon. The Roman army used these features to create choke points, where the enemy could be funneled into narrow passages, where the Romans' superior discipline and tactical formations could neutralize any numerical disadvantage. The famous Roman testudo, or tortoise formation, also adapted for winter conditions. Typically used to shield soldiers from projectiles, this tight formation of overlapping shields was particularly effective in the winter months, when snowstorms and low visibility made range combat more difficult. When marching through deep snow or facing enemy archers in the cold, the testudo shielded Roman soldiers not only from physical missiles, but also from the harsh elements, creating a mobile fortress that allowed them to maintain cohesion and fight effectively. The strategy of keeping units close together, with shields interlocked, was especially beneficial in blizzards or freezing rain, providing warmth and protection from the wind. The Roman military also employed skirmishers and specialized light infantry during winter campaigns. These troops, often drawn from auxiliary forces, used their knowledge of local terrain and weather to their advantage. In the deep forests of Germania, where dense trees and snow slowed movement, these skirmishers harassed enemy units with hit-and-run tactics, making use of the cover provided by the environment. The ability to conduct quick, precise strikes while remaining hidden from view was invaluable in environments where visibility was often limited by snowstorms and fog. These units disrupted enemy formations, forcing them to fight under unfavorable conditions. In regions like the Alps, where steep slopes and difficult terrain created significant challenges, Roman commanders deployed their forces in smaller, more agile units. Rather than relying on large formations, the army broke into smaller groups that could move efficiently through the mountains, maintaining their combat effectiveness even in these challenging environments. Roman engineers also contributed to the success of winter campaigns by building bridges and roads that helped maintain mobility during the harshest months. The Roman ability to adapt in winter combat was not limited to physical tactics alone. Psychological warfare played an important role. The relentless nature of winter, combined with the Roman army's reputation for discipline and resilience, often wore down enemy forces who lacked the same level of preparation and adaptability. Roman soldiers, accustomed to hardship, were able to maintain focus and morale during extended winter campaigns, while many of their enemies faltered under the strain of both combat and extreme weather. The legacy of Roman winter strategies, influence on future armies. The Roman military's strategies for surviving and fighting in winter left a lasting legacy that influenced future armies for centuries. While the specific techniques used by Roman soldiers may have evolved or been adapted over time, the core principles of winter warfare preparation, adaptability, and resilience became integral to military doctrine across various cultures. These lessons, learned through trial and error in some of the harshest environments of the ancient world, laid the groundwork for how armies would handle cold weather operations in the future. Roman success in winter warfare stemmed from their ability to combine disciplined training with practical, adaptable strategies. The legion's emphasis on maintaining well-organized supply chains, fortifications, and mobility under harsh conditions set a benchmark for armies in subsequent centuries. Early medieval armies, particularly those of the Frankish and Byzantine empires, adopted similar techniques for enduring winter campaigns. The idea of building fortified camps that could withstand not only enemy attack, but also severe weather became a common military practice. Additionally, Roman engineers renowned for their ingenuity in construction laid the foundation for how future armies would approach logistical challenges in cold weather. The use of insulated shelters, temporary fortifications, and efficient camp layouts was a Roman innovation that allowed soldiers to stay warm and secure during long winter deployments. These principles were integrated into military tactics throughout the medieval period, influencing everything from the design of medieval castles to the construction of military winter camps in later European wars. Winter warfare, as practiced by the Romans, also had a psychological impact on future military leaders. Roman commanders knew that their soldiers' mental fortitude was as important as their physical ability to endure. Winter in the Roman world tested the will to survive as much as the will to fight. The Romans' success in overcoming the harshest conditions, often through simple yet effective strategies, reinforced the idea that overcoming the environment could be just as important as defeating the enemy. This concept was adopted by future military leaders, who would emphasize the importance of discipline, morale, and leadership in facing the psychological challenges of winter operations. Furthermore, the use of auxiliary forces, specialized troops, and local knowledge of terrain were lessons that would resonate throughout history. Future armies learned the importance of tailoring their forces to their environment, using local resources and skilled troops familiar with the cold. In the 16th and 17th centuries, European armies deployed similar strategies, recruiting soldiers with expertise in specific climates, much like the Roman auxiliaries who came from various regions, adapted to different forms of winter survival. Even the use of specialized tactics, such as the Roman testudo formation adapted for winter conditions, found its way into later military manuals. The concept of forming tight, disciplined groups to protect soldiers from the elements while remaining cohesive in battle influenced later infantry tactics, especially in environments where visibility was limited due to snow, fog, or rain. Roman strategies for winter survival and combat shaped military thinking long after the fall of the empire. Whether through the use of terrain, fortifications, or specialized tactics, the legacy of Roman winter warfare demonstrated that effective preparation and discipline could transform harsh conditions into opportunities for success. The role of winter in shaping Roman military doctrine. Winter, in many ways, was a defining force in shaping Roman military doctrine. The harsh conditions of the empire's northern and eastern frontiers acted as both a challenge and a catalyst for the evolution of Roman military practices. Roman commanders, soldiers, and engineers had to find ways not only to survive the cold, but to turn the winter months into a period of opportunity. Winter survival influenced everything from the structure of the Roman camp to the development of specific tactics and training methods that became integral to the Roman approach to warfare. Roman military doctrine was built on the idea of adaptability. One of the reasons the Romans were so successful in maintaining a vast empire was their ability to modify their strategies to suit different environments. In the case of winter, this meant developing a comprehensive set of tactics and tools to combat the challenges of extreme cold, snow, and icy terrain. Survival in the winter months required Roman forces to be self-sufficient, as resupply routes could be cut off or delayed by snowstorms and frozen rivers. This led to innovations in logistics, from the construction of fortified camps that could withstand freezing conditions to the design of specialized clothing and even the development of local supply systems that ensured troops could function throughout the winter months. Roman commanders, understanding the limits of human endurance, also adapted their strategies to account for the psychological toll that winter had on soldiers. Long hours of darkness, freezing temperatures, and isolation could lead to fatigue, stress, and even despair. To mitigate this, Roman military leaders placed an emphasis on maintaining a strict routine. This routine, which included everything from daily drills to camp organization and communal meal preparation, provided soldiers with structure and purpose, even in the harshest of conditions. The physical demands of winter survival, combined with a strong sense of discipline, helped soldiers maintain their mental toughness. Moreover, winter training became an essential part of the Roman military experience. While training for the Roman legions was rigorous throughout the year, winter posed additional challenges that required soldiers to develop greater endurance and flexibility. Winter drills often focused on maintaining combat readiness despite the harsh elements. Soldiers would practice their formations and combat tactics in the snow, adapting to the slower pace of movement in deep drifts, or while wearing heavier layers of clothing and gear. These exercises were critical in ensuring that Roman forces remained effective and operational, even in the depths of winter. Roman military engineers, who played a key role in the survival of winter campaigns, also contributed to the evolution of military doctrine. They developed techniques for building insulated tents, fortifications, and other structures that could withstand extreme cold. The use of local materials, from wood and stone to branches and snow, was also a key part of Roman ingenuity. These innovations helped to ensure that soldiers could rest, eat, and prepare for combat even when faced with the harshest conditions. Winter warfare and Roman tactical flexibility. Winter warfare was not simply about enduring the elements, it was about adapting combat tactics to the harsh conditions. The Roman military's success lay in its flexibility and ability to modify traditional strategies for each unique environment, and winter provided a powerful test of this adaptability. As the Romans faced extreme cold, snow, and shorter days, they adjusted their tactics to ensure their dominance in winter campaigns. Their ability to fight effectively despite these challenges showcased their tactical genius and their reliance on discipline and innovation. One of the most significant adaptations in winter combat was the strategic use of terrain. The Romans, known for their mastery of battlefield tactics, applied this expertise to winter conditions. Snow-covered forests, frozen rivers, and rugged mountain passes all presented unique challenges, but they also provided opportunities for tactical advantage. Roman commanders recognized that their standard formations and strategies would not always work in these altered environments. Instead, they used the terrain to create choke points where enemy forces could be funneled, preventing them from spreading out and exploiting the environment's harshness. Roman forces often employed smaller, more mobile units in winter conditions, relying on their agility to maneuver through difficult terrain. These units, usually composed of light infantry and auxiliaries familiar with the local environment, were particularly useful in mountainous or forested regions. The legions, typically organized in large, tightly knit formations, could become less effective in deep snow or steep slopes, where movement was slowed. By breaking into smaller groups, Roman commanders were able to maintain their effectiveness and flexibility in winter battles, executing hit-and-run tactics or using ambushes to surprise enemy forces. Another key aspect of Roman winter tactics was the adaptation of combat formations. The testudo, a formation of tightly packed soldiers with shields interlocked to form a protective shell, was an iconic Roman tactic used in battle. In winter, this formation became even more critical. The testudo not only protected soldiers from projectiles, but also from the biting wind and snow that would otherwise make movement and cohesion difficult. In blizzard conditions, where visibility was poor and the cold stung through clothing, the testudo allowed Roman forces to maintain order and control, even in adverse weather. Roman engineers also played a significant role in adapting tactics for winter conditions. The construction of fortifications, temporary camps, and bridges was vital to maintaining Roman strength in winter months. Fortifications were not only designed for defense against enemy attacks, but also to provide protection from the elements. Insulated tents, built with local materials, ensured that soldiers could rest despite the cold. Engineers also developed innovative ways to clear snow from roads, allowing the Roman army to maintain its mobility in the harshest winters. The psychological aspect of winter warfare was also crucial. Roman soldiers, through years of rigorous training, were mentally prepared for the hardships of winter campaigns. Their ability to endure harsh conditions without letting the cold undermine their morale was a testament to the strength of their discipline. Commanders knew the importance of maintaining their soldiers' spirits, and they used clear leadership, structured routines, and shared hardships to ensure that soldiers remained focused, no matter how severe the conditions. The Roman army's use of winter as a strategic advantage. While winter was often seen as an obstacle by many ancient armies, the Roman military learned to turn it into a strategic advantage. In contrast, other forces that struggled in cold weather, Roman soldiers were trained and equipped to not only endure the winter, but also use the conditions to their advantage. Whether through psychological warfare, controlling supply lines, or using winter's isolation to execute surprise tactics, the Romans knew how to make the harshest season work in their favor. One of the most powerful tools the Romans had in using winter to their advantage was the psychological effect it had on their enemies. While Roman soldiers were trained to withstand the cold, many of the barbarian tribes along the empire's frontiers were not. The winter months, with their freezing temperatures and isolation, could break the morale of enemy forces. Armies that relied on seasonal warfare often struggled to maintain cohesion when the cold set in. The Romans, on the other hand, were capable of enduring the harshest conditions, and this resilience gave them a significant edge in combat. For Roman commanders, the challenge was not just survival, but maintaining their soldiers' fighting spirit, while for their enemies, the cold often led to frustration and demoralization. The winter months also allowed the Roman military to control supply lines and isolate enemy forces. As the weather worsened, roads became more treacherous, making it difficult for enemy armies to resupply or retreat. The Romans were skilled at maintaining their own supply chains, often taking advantage of local resources to replenish their stockpiles when traditional routes were closed. This control over logistics allowed the Roman army to stay operational during the winter months, while enemies without similar systems were forced to rely on uncertain and distant resources. Isolating enemy forces through these supply disruptions was a critical tactic, especially when those forces were vulnerable to the cold. Another way the Romans used winter to their advantage was through surprise attacks. The harsh weather made it difficult for enemy scouts to maintain watch or monitor troop movements. Snow, fog, and darkness provided cover for Roman forces to move undetected, setting up ambushes or launching rapid strikes. Roman commanders understood that winter created a unique opportunity for swift and decisive action, often catching enemies off guard when they were least prepared. In regions where the terrain was already challenging, like the forests of Germania or the mountains of the Alps, the winter further limited the movement and capabilities of enemy troops, giving the Romans an additional edge. Roman military discipline also played a role in turning winter into a strategic advantage. While many enemy forces faltered in the face of harsh conditions, Roman soldiers adhered to strict routines, ensuring that they remained in top condition despite the cold. Their ability to quickly build fortified camps, maintain equipment, and adapt to winter conditions allowed them to maintain readiness, even during the most difficult months. This discipline not only kept them operational, but allowed them to execute strategies that were unthinkable for other armies that had been worn down by the elements. The enduring legacy of Roman winter strategies. The Roman approach to winter warfare and survival didn't just sustain their military efforts for a few seasons, it laid the foundation for military strategies used for centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman innovations in winter survival, from their tactical flexibility to their engineering expertise, influenced future armies and shaped the development of warfare in cold climates for generations. These strategies became part of the military legacy that was passed down, not only through the Byzantine Empire, but also through medieval European armies, and even into modern military doctrine. One of the most lasting contributions of Roman winter strategies was their approach to military logistics. Roman armies were adept at maintaining supply lines, ensuring that even in the harshest climates, their forces could remain operational. They understood the importance of well-organized supply chains and the ability to use local resources. This logistical efficiency became a key feature of military operations for centuries to come. Later empires, such as the Byzantine Empire and medieval European kingdoms, learned from Roman methods and adopted similar practices for keeping troops supplied in difficult conditions. The Roman model showed that success in winter warfare was not just about physical endurance, but also about maintaining strong infrastructure and resource management. Roman tactics for winter combat also left a significant legacy. The ability to adapt to winter conditions, to use terrain effectively, and to employ psychological warfare against enemies unfamiliar with cold climates became staples of future military campaigns. The idea of using the environment, whether through terrain manipulation or the strategic use of weather, was adopted by later commanders, who saw the value in incorporating winter into their battlefield strategies. In the centuries following the fall of Rome, military leaders in Europe and the Middle East adapted these lessons to fight in cold and mountainous terrains, ensuring that the Roman legacy of tactical flexibility endured. The Roman emphasis on training and discipline in winter conditions also set a precedent for future armies. Roman soldiers were taught to thrive in adverse conditions, and this spirit of endurance and adaptability influenced military training throughout history. The concept of rigorous training to prepare soldiers for harsh environments became a standard in many armies, including the medieval knights and later military units in the 19th and 20th centuries. Modern special forces, for example, continue to train soldiers to operate in extreme conditions, drawing on centuries-old military traditions that were first refined by the Romans. Finally, Roman winter survival strategies had a profound impact on the development of military engineering. The Roman military's ability to construct winter-ready fortifications, roads, and shelters became an example for future armies. The use of local materials, the construction of fortified camps, and the ability to adapt structures for winter needs influenced medieval fortifications and military architecture for centuries. These innovations made it possible for soldiers to endure in cold climates and continue to fight effectively, even when faced with the harshest weather conditions. In the end, the Roman success in winter warfare was not just about surviving the cold, it was about thriving in the face of adversity. Their legacy in winter combat lives on, not only in the lessons they imparted, but in the enduring military strategies that continue to shape how armies approach cold weather operations.